the Winter Dragon Lord of Game of Thrones. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 76, Internal and External Troubles. The Onion Knight, Davos Seaworth, was once a smuggler. Smugglers are considered criminals in Westeros, and he paid the price of 4 fingers for this. As his nickname came from, he was also a knight who became famous in the Siege of Storm's End more than a decade ago. He used his smuggling ship Black Bess to deliver a shipload of onions and pickled fish to the starving garrison of Storm's End, which was almost devouring human flesh. He supported the castle and waited for the Northern Army to come to help, thus winning the victory. Although this knight is not as famous for his bravery as Ser Barristan the Fearless, his courage is undeniable. In addition to his superb ship skills, his courage is also indispensable for his courage to use a smuggling ship to cross the blockade of the Highgarden fleet to support Storm's End. As one of the perspective characters, the Onion Knight, Cole has a very good impression. During the days he served under Stannis, he was actually quite regretful that he had not seen the Onion Knight. The two of them worked for Erlu together in a similar capacity, so they would have more common language. A knight from the Great Wall, and a smuggler knight, Ser Seaworth, Lord Julius. The two civilian knights greeted each other politely, but fortunately there were no noble people around them. I didn't expect that His Majesty would send you here to deliver a letter. Cole invited him to sit in front of a tree stump. I have read the king's letter. I wonder if he has any other message to say. Davos nodded. You have won an inspiring victory, my lord. His Majesty is very satisfied. He praised you in front of all the lords. You know he rarely praises you. Your Majesty wants to ask you, what are your plans next? Did something happen in the castle? The Onion Knight sighed. Lord Montfort Valerian asked your Majesty to send troops to fight Renly. He is a radical man. At the meeting, he threatened your Majesty that, if you don't send troops immediately, he will take his men back to Tidehead Island and no longer fight for your Majesty. It's really internal and external troubles. What exactly does this Lord Valerian want to do? Cole has no idea. He only knows that he is an arrogant guy. But now busy starting a war is not the same as busy dying. This is really bad news. Has His Majesty agreed? Davos shook his head. No. Renly seems to be determined to fight Storm's End to the death. He did not retreat, even if the food was burned. Cole looked at the direction of Storm's End in the distance. I heard that he sent people to Highgarden to collect food. Davos looked at him. Seeing his expectant eyes, Cole smiled bitterly. Even if they know this news, what can they do? They won't be stupid enough to be fooled again, sir. You go back and tell His Majesty the King that I will take people to invade Renly's grain transport team, but you also know that I only have so many people and can't do much. What can 800 people do? They have suffered heavy casualties. Some were stabbed off their horses with spears, some were tripped, and some were shot by arrows. Although their victory was easy, they still lost more than 300 brothers, and more than 200 people were injured to varying degrees. Every charge will lose a few faces. I will convey it truthfully, Davos said. At this time, the smell of meat came, and Cole stood up. Go and taste the horse meat, sir. 2 horses fell down when we rode back, and I had them roasted. The Dothraki only eat horse meat. They believe that horse meat can make them stronger. Davos stood up and tried to make a joke to see Cole's expression. Cole smiled. If you eat too much meat, you will get stomach upset. You still have to eat some fruits and vegetables. Have you been to Dothraki, sir? Davos shook his head. His smuggling activities were only on the sea and the coast. The Dothraki have a bad reputation across the narrow sea. Every city-state wants these guys to stay away from them. People who don't farm are always like this. I heard that one of their horse kings claimed to conquer Westeros. This is not easy. I don't think our king will let those guys cross the sea. A servant brought horse meat on a plate to them. There was a simple tent in the camp, and Eldarin and several knights were already eating and drinking inside. When they saw Cole coming in, they all stood up to greet him. With a plate in hand, he sat on the cushion. Lord Cole, has the king issued any new orders? A knight asked as he cut the horse meat and stuffed it into his mouth. The taste of horse meat is not very good. It has a strong smell and tastes a bit sour. The meat is also tenderier than beef. Before stuffing the horse meat into their mouths, they all had to take a bite of roasted onions or chew it with blueberries. Your Majesty asked us to keep up the good work. After we finish the repairs, we still have a lot of things to do. A knight raised his glass. Sir Seaworth, welcome. Davos raised his glass in response. They seemed to be talking about something before Cole and the others came in, and Sir Geoffrey continued his topic. The one who led people to chase us is Fortimo Crane. I met him at the tournament. They came really quickly this time, but I think his expression must have been very interesting when he saw the flames. Sir, did you fight with them? Eldarin asked anxiously. The scouts had already explored the way, and we crossed the Wend River directly on a wooden bridge. Wine barrels were already placed on the bridge, and when we crossed the bridge, we just set it on fire. However, a few guys who were chasing us caught up, and I killed one of them with my own hands. I really wish I could go with you. Durin's face was full of regret, as if he had missed something great. He looked at Cole. The war is not over yet, Sir Durin. Cole took a bite of horse meat, which was indeed not very delicious. Can you take me with you to the next battle, sir? Durin asked. Okay. If he really wants to go and take a look, then let the kid go. But if anything happens, it's not his fault. After all, swords have no eyes, and no one can tell what will happen on the battlefield. Sir, tell us, how do you know they will go from there? A knight couldn't help but ask out of curiosity. Cole naturally wouldn't tell him about the White Dragon, and could only use the excuse that it was found out by scouts. Information is a very important factor on the battlefield. The more information we have, the more perfect strategies we can formulate, and we can also take action one step ahead of the enemy. Well, he could only talk nonsense. Anyway, few people would take what they said at dinner seriously. Everyone would just brag and have fun, and forget about it after a good night's sleep. Before they knew it, it was already dark. After spending the night in the camp, the Onion Knight left early the next morning. He had to return to the coast first, and then drive the boat back to Storm's End. Cole was also preparing for what to do next. They could go directly into the Kingswood from the Dawn Mountains to harass the convoy and some outer troops. But in the Kingswood, the White Dragon's vision could not be unobstructed unless a large number of troops were moving. But large troops were not something they could deal with. There was not much Cole could do, and next it would depend on Stannis himself. Melisandre, what are you waiting for? Kill Renly quickly. Chapter 77, Attack on the Camp. The horses' hooves were brisk, passing through the Imperial Forest. They were riding mountain ponies, and there were more than 100 of them, hiding in the bushes like ghosts in the forest. Suddenly, a figure was seen moving in front of them, and a small group of 3 or 5 cavalrymen were coming this way. The leader was wearing dark green leather armor, a half helmet, and a grey cloak. He glanced around, and seemed to have discovered something unusual. Just as he was about to shout, he heard the sound of an arrow breaking through the air. He hesitated and found himself speechless. Only then did he realize that the arrow had already pierced his throat. There were many ghosts in the forest, and a shadow came from all directions, and soon they were surrounded. The leader died so suddenly that even his accomplices around him did not have time to be surprised. The leader who emerged from the forest was wearing a black leather armor, and under the leather armor, he could vaguely see the interlocking chains, and his silver hair was eye-catching. The horse under his crotch was moving slowly, and he held the bow horizontally. It was obvious that the arrow just now came from his hand. A man who knows the times is a hero. This group of scouts quickly surrendered. Soon they were tied up in front of the silver-haired knight. The man asked him some information, and then had them cover their heads with hoods, and tied to a tree, and then led the people into the forest quickly. My lord, there is a camp ahead. A scout came back to report. Cole nodded. He had already seen clearly from the White Dragon that sending out scouts was also a prudent move. This was Renly's team that cut down trees and built equipment. They had cut down large tracts of forests, and the severity was no less than the fire set by Cole. Judging from the walls of Storm's End that had been strengthened for several epochs, it would not be easy to attack without heavy work. For Renly, who grew up here, he naturally knew this etiquette. They had originally built a lot of equipment for attacking King's Landing at Bitterbridge, but Cole burned them all down. Now they can only rebuild them on the spot. Now, let's not talk about attacking King's Landing. Let's take down Storm's End first. Cole couldn't understand what the two brothers were fighting about. Did they want to deal with the internal affairs first, and then deal with the external affairs? Lady Stark was right. They were brothers, and shouldn't be like this. But power is an addictive thing. Whoever gets it will not let it go. Sometimes, if you just let go, you can get better results, but some people would rather let the power rot in their hands than let it go. People are selfish. The White Dragon explored the army's deployment from the sky. There were only 20 or so cavalrymen, and the rest were infantry. Because of transportation, this camp was not heavily defended, with only a sentry tower and some low wooden fences. There were about 1,000 people in the whole camp, most of them were servants. They were all tenants and serfs brought by noble lords from the surrounding areas or territories. The lords were too lazy to arm these people, nor did they use them on the battlefield. They would only use them to fill the gap when they were really short of people, like Cole's serf army. Although killing these people would not cause much damage to Renly's combat power, it would slow down his progress. Cole gave an order and the cavalry followed him to charge. There was only a shout of killing in the camp, and the cavalry had already rushed in from a gap in the defense. They went straight to the cavalry guarding the camp. The knight was in charge of guarding this camp, and there were more than 200 guards. He only heard a commotion in the camp, and a group of enemies rushed to his front. The sound of swords clanged, and they were rushed to pieces before they could gather. The knight's armor was very eye-catching. Cole tightened the reins and rushed to him. He was the only one wearing plate armor, so his identity was known. The double sword swung and stabbed, and the man blocked with a shield. The sword swung like water and chopped down, causing the horses to stagger. The knight was startled and stretched out his hand to hold the reins tightly, and clamped his foot on the horse's belly, not knowing that his hand had already slipped. Cole rode back, and took the knight's head with one sword. When the knight fell, the morale of the army was gone. The remaining soldiers just fled. Cole and others ignored those who fled, but burned all the materials in the camp, and hid in the royal forest. Scouts were killed, the outer camp was attacked, and the caravan was looted. Soon, Renly and other lords found that a group of wild wolves came to their rear. 5 logging sites were burned, and dozens of scouts were missing. Sir Bryce Cullen, the Rainbow Guard in an orange cloak, reported the losses to the king. Your Majesty, as expected, it was this cavalry that attacked Lord Tyrell. The leader should be Cole Julius. Baron Meadow, who was in the cage, had already confessed most of the information, but he still kept some secrets in his heart. He originally planned to use them as bargaining chips for surrender, but who knew that his men were more eager to surrender than him. Before the Highgarden army attacked, the city gate was opened by several traitors. At this time, a knight walked by. It was someone Meadow knew. It seemed that he had not gone to those banquets and tournaments in vain. At least he knew many important people. As for whether they recognized him, it was unknown. This person was Sir Bryce Cullen, the Earl of Nightsong. A knight with a good reputation in the Seven Kingdoms. He is now King Renly's Rainbow Guard. The Rainbow Guard is Renly's King's Guard, a total of 7 people, just corresponding to the 7 colors of the rainbow. Baron Meadow requests to see you, Your Majesty. He seems to have important news to tell you. Sir Orange Guard Cullen continued to say to Renly. Meadow? Have someone bring him in. This guy was almost executed by the Highgardeners as the main culprit of arson. Seeing Renly, Baron Meadow knelt down and kept approaching him. The Rainbow Guard was about to stop him, but Renly waved his hand to signal that there was no need to disturb him. Meadow walked all the way to Renly's feet and kissed his boots. Your Majesty, Elwood Meadow of Greendale greets you. Renly seemed to find it quite interesting and was not in a hurry to let him get up. He just asked, I heard that you have news for me. Yes, Your Majesty. I know the movements of Cole Julius and others. Before your army visited Greendale, the cavalry intended to enter the castle, but I stopped them outside the door. I'm loyal to Your Majesty the King. I once served as the deputy of Lord Courtenay Penrose and guarded Storm's End for you. But you betrayed His Majesty. You are not worthy of being called a knight. Elwood Meadow. Sir Good Morrigan, the green-clad Rainbow Guard, shouted at him. Let him finish, Renly said to his side. The green-clad Ser looked at the kneeling man with disdain and stepped aside. Meadal cursed in his heart, but his face was still full of flattery. Your Majesty, they didn't expect that I sent people to follow them. I knew they were in the Dawn Mountains. Ser Loras Tyrell nodded brazenly. I see. No wonder our scouts couldn't find their base. Chapter 78 Attacked. How is it? How do you feel? They gathered around the fire, and Cole asked Tyrion, the little fat boy. The 100 cavalrymen were too conspicuous, so when they dispersed, they would split into 5 teams. Hidden in the mountains and forests, there was a brother on the treetops who was on guard. He drank hot wine on one side, and paid attention to the surrounding movements on the other. They passed the wine bag in turn. Now the enemy was alert, and sent a large number of scouts and patrol cavalry in the royal forest, and their activities became very difficult. Tyrion followed Cole's team to charge, and there were several family ministers following him. He also felt the experience of going to the battlefield. The little fat boy looked bitter. Although he had prepared himself mentally, the pain and fatigue of the war were beyond his expectations. They rushed to kill the enemy, and were also chased by the enemy. When will this battle end, Cole? After a few days of getting along, the two were no longer alienated, and began to call each other by their first names. Tyrion was indeed simple, but he did not have the arrogance and prejudice of the nobles, which was why Cole was willing to be friends with him. I don't know. Cole shook his head. But it should be soon. He muttered, as if he didn't have much confidence in this, because he clearly remembered that the battle didn't last long. Stannis attacked Storm's End, and then Renly led the army to fight him. The two agreed to start the battle at dawn, and then before dawn, Renly was killed by the Shadow Assassin, and the war ended. The wine was just passed to him, and he didn't care about whether it was hygienic or not. Cole drank a sip, and handed it to Tyrion. Tyrion also took a sip. Do you think we can win? He asked, and everyone looked over. Cole had long been their backbone. His wisdom and bravery were witnessed by everyone. Yes, we will win. We will definitely win. Cole gave them such an affirmative answer. No matter what the end is, he can't show a tendency to lose now, although he is also very tired. He didn't expect things to develop like this. War is sometimes like playing chess. Cole was born with several chess boards that have never been seen before, which gave him an advantage. To outsiders, it was like a flash of wisdom. This was his advantage, but soon the advantage would disappear. The commander of each side is the chess player. They can dominate the trend of the battlefield with every step. All they need to do is put the right chess piece in the right position. Every chess piece is also a chess player, just like Cole and Mace Tyrell. Perhaps neither of them has a natural talent in military affairs. More than a decade ago, Mace led people to besiege Storm's End, which showed that his vision was too shallow. He only focused on a small piece of land in the south. If he did not fight Storm's End to death, but led people to the north, or brought people to King's Landing, the final victory would be unknown. He just besieged it for a year, thus missing countless opportunities. There are too many possibilities in war, and the winner is often the one who has both luck and strength. Cole was not a chess player who looked ahead 3 steps ahead. He did not even think that Mace would transport the materials in a centralized manner. He just wanted to make some things first to make their task easier. The opportunity of war was really fleeting. If Cole had not observed the White Dragon, and all the materials were delivered to the foot of Storm's End, the situation of the war would have changed, and his mission would have been a failure. No one could have thought that Mace would go all in before Cole turned over the cards. This was also luck. He controlled the opportunity and set up an ambush. He even used the advantage of the White Dragon to make Mace run around. In front of the campfire, everyone did not know what he was thinking. For them, they just had to listen to Cole. Once upon a time, Cole was the same. He only needed to be an executor. If he completed the task and protected himself, he would be able to gain fame and fortune. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound on the treetops, and the sentry shouted, "Someone is coming." They quickly untied the ropes and mounted their horses, and the sound was getting closer and closer. Everyone was still wondering whether the person coming was a friend or foe, but Balong took the lead and flew over to see. The night was as dark as ink, and the moonlight was hidden under the dense clouds. If someone with impaired vision walked on the night road, he would be blind. Even Cole and his men could not rush through the forest at such a night. Balong was hidden in the sky. He flew high and looked like an eagle from the ground. Although his body might be slightly larger than that of a falcon, he was just a small dot in the sky. No one would suspect that he was the enemy's spy, although there were some aliens in this world who could use animals as their eyes. Balong did not dare to fly low, but the clouds and shade of the trees were thick, and it was difficult for him to see the situation on the ground for a while. He only saw a few lights flashing. Balong opened his eyes of time and looked carefully. He saw a group of cavalrymen walking slowly, more than a dozen people, all wearing armor, and one of them was holding a lance with a flag. They seemed to be attracted by the fire, and soon the two sides exchanged horses. Cole shouted and took the lead in charging. The two sides had similar numbers, but Cole had a slight advantage. They turned around and ran away, not engaging Cole and his men at all. Cole caught the first person, holding his sword straight. That person had the thickest armor, so it goes without saying that he must be the leader of the group. With a clang, Cole's sword was blocked, and two lances came straight to the left and right. They were the two guards beside the enemy leader. Cole followed the lances, and his chainmail could not resist the lances. In the eyes of time, he dodged sideways and slapped the lance with the guard behind his wrist. One lance missed, and the other lance moved sideways. The three enemies did not rush forward, so they retracted their lances and swords, pulled away quickly, and retreated in the direction they came from. Cole looked around and saw that his own people had already chased into the forest. He suddenly felt something was wrong, but he also spurred his horse lightly and followed closely. Someone in front of him was knocked to the ground by a branch. Cole saw that he could not recognize him and stabbed him with a knife. Before Cole could catch up, there was a sudden noise of horses' hooves around. Cole was shocked. Oh no, he had fallen into a trap. This method was very familiar to him. He said that it was impossible for that team to run away when they saw someone. They were clearly well armored and their numbers were not much different. He quickly approached the team. Cavalrymen were coming from all sides. Cole quickly ordered a breakout. The white dragon folded its wings and pitched down through the clouds. It opened the Eye of Time and made the space stagnant. The enemy was in his sight and he quickly looked for a place to break through. Cole shouted for them to follow him, and he took the lead to ride his horse to the east. There were more than 100 enemy soldiers, but there were only a dozen in this direction, which was the weakest. He turned his head to avoid the stray arrows. At this time, he saw Tyrion. His armor was the most eye-catching in the team. Because he was inexperienced, Cole let him wear his thick armor. This conspicuous armor obviously became the focus of the enemy's fire. Under the Eye of Time and Space, Cole saw that several arrows were shot at him, but most of them deviated, but one was flying towards a horse under his crotch. As luck would have it, the arrow hit the horse's eye. With a neigh, the horse, which was running rapidly, threw its head back and fell down with a thud. Little fat boy Tyrion was in the air for a while and then fell heavily to the ground. Chapter 79, Retreat to Cape Wrath. Cole looked at the fallen Tyrion with a lot of thoughts in his mind. He thought of the little fat boy who followed behind him with admiration on his face, naively thinking that the battlefield was as romantic as a knight's story. No one told him that knights would bleed, scream, and even kneel down to beg for mercy, just like a princess would poop. He had been advised that the battlefield was full of dangers, and it was not as easy as hunting. Cole did not look back or turn around. His eyes turned back to the front. He rushed forward with his sword, killed 2 people, and broke out, with only 6 or 7 people following behind him. After winding around in the woods, there were finally 4 people behind him. They stopped until they could no longer hear the horses' hooves and human voices behind them, and then they looked at each other and fell silent. "Return to the Dawn Mountains first," Cole said to them calmly. He looked back at the dark forest and exhaled a breath of turbid air. Maybe one day he will be abandoned on the battlefield like this, he couldn't help thinking. The end of the 3rd century of the Aegon calendar was a chaotic time. There was no peach blossom spring here. The storm was everywhere, and it was impossible to stay in peace for long. At this moment, a cold wind blew, like a knife on the wall of despair. It made Cole's neck shrink. The coldness could not wrap around Cole's body, but he could feel it. It was a familiar smell. Unfortunately, the snowflakes have not arrived. Maybe the snow in the south will be much later, but the cold winter has arrived. The cold wind blew, and the summer was over. I didn't expect it to come so soon. These children of summer should accept the test of severe cold. When the morning light was revealed in the sky and the round sun rose to the mountainside, the 5 people slowly walked to the camp. It was already a mess. Of course, they were not attacked, but moved to the next stronghold. This was arranged by Cole when he left. It was to prevent someone from falling into the hands of the enemy and exposing the location of the camp. Now only Cole knew where the camp was, and they continued to go deeper. Cole asked the White Dragon to wander in the sky and patrol. As long as his own people came, he would go to meet them. That morning, the White Dragon saw a small group of cavalry coming to the camp from a distance. It was Camillo's team. Cole led people to meet them. Camillo was already a qualified executor at that time. Some people were like this. They just lacked opportunities. A total of 3 teams returned, and each team suffered losses. 100 people set out, and 53 returned. Of course, the last team was unknown. Cole led them to the camp. He asked the White Dragon to stay there and send people to meet the last team later. I just don't know if this team can still come back. After a few days, the last team did not wait, but a large group of people came instead. This was a team of 1,000 cavalrymen. The golden roses fluttering on the green fields could be seen in the flags. They came fiercely and rushed straight to the abandoned camp. This army was led by Garland Tyrell, and beside him was Elwood Mado and many knights of Highgarden. A knight looked at the abandoned land and said, "Lord Tyrell, it seems they have escaped." The soldier brought a bound captive to Garland and asked, "Is this the camp you mentioned?" The man took a look and nodded with certainty. This man was a cavalryman under Cole. Although Cole felt bad about the betrayal, his reason made him choose to understand. Everyone is afraid of death, and he is no exception. This was within his expectations. Cole summoned the remaining dozen riders under his command and shared the information about the White Dragon. They had more than 700 soldiers who could fight. Excluding a dozen seriously injured people, the gap with the enemy was not big and the combat power was equal. If they met head on, they would not necessarily lose. The enemy was in the dark, and Cole had more room for operation. He summoned the knights together to discuss the strategy against the enemy. Spreading out the map, it was a topographic map of the Dawn Mountains. The mountains were undulating, and the mountain roads were rugged. There were even many places where people had not been to, and there were no roads, let alone riding horses. Such terrain is extremely unfavorable for cavalry combat. Fortunately, Cole had brought 100 mountain horses. Compared with war horses, these horses are shorter, but they are more agile in the mountains and have stronger endurance. This is what he learned from the tribesmen when he was in the Mingayu Mountains. The tribesmen all rode this kind of horses. When they walked in the mountains, even the valley cavalry could not catch up with them. Cole pressed a stone on a part of the mountain. This is the position of the enemy. There are about 1,000 people, all cavalry. Sir Geoffrey, Camillo, Sir Lance. These people were arranged by Cole to various teams, each commanding a dozen people. Jose and others were Cole's personal guards. They gathered around to look at the map. Cole's drawing was very delicate. The mountains and forests were represented one by one with simple patterns. Even if you can't read, you can still understand clearly. 1,000 cavalry, are we going to fight them? Sir Lance asked everyone. Everyone looked at each other, and no one expressed an opinion for a while. A decisive battle is indeed a good method, but it is too risky. Cole said softly. The king's mission is to disrupt the enemy's rear as much as possible. Sir, just tell us directly. We will listen to you for whatever you need us to do. Sir Geoffrey said loudly. Everyone nodded. Cole stared at the map in a trance. What should he do? Use the terrain here to ambush? Or build fortifications to defend? Or take people away? Retreat. He pointed to the mountains on the map. We will go from here, down the valley of Midsummer Hall, to Cape Wrath. Cole's eyes suddenly fixed. He stood up suddenly and shouted loudly, gather all the troops. The soldiers were stunned for a moment, and they couldn't understand the commander's intention for a while. Only to hear him say again, the enemy is coming. What? How could it be so fast? In front of the Highgarden army, there were dozens of hounds exploring the way, and some mountain people in simple clothes. Yes, there are mountain people living in the Dawn Mountains. Cole has always been careful not to contact the mountain people, but in terms of the degree of familiarity with this mountain range, they are far more familiar with Cole than Cole. The enemy was getting closer and closer, and the camp was in chaos. After a quick gathering, they slowly retreated to the mountains. Just before they left, the Highgarden Knights found this camp. Looking at the fire that was still burning, Tyrell was sure that the target was close. My lord, there are traces of horse hooves here. It seems that the enemy is very sharp and has been one step ahead of us. Garland looked at the reassurance and immediately ordered, Sir Eric, I need you to lead people to chase them immediately, but you must not expose yourself or fight with them. As long as you find the enemy, report quickly. Yes, my lord. The knight led the scouts and set off. The white dragon followed closely behind the Highgarden people and horses, and their every move was in his eyes. Cole led the army in front, and all the servants had been dispersed. He ordered Joffrey, continue to lead the army forward. Let Joe hand the white bird flag to Joffrey, and then Cole gathered a dozen riders and went to the back of the team. Chapter 80 Fierce Battle. This is our man, sir. When they found the body of the scout, Tyrell had led the army to pursue for more than a day, but no scout had returned. Now they were still confused about the enemy's location. This kind of enemy is too difficult to deal with. How did they find so many scouts? As for the escaped party, careful people can find that their commander seems to be in a very bad mental state. They may not know, but Cole understands that he has used too much of the Eye of Time. His blue-purple eyes are full of intricate bloodshot. They can't relax for a moment. If they let a scout go, they will be quickly caught up. The white dragon lingers on the Highgarden army day and night. They bite Cole's back tightly and send out scouts one after another. Cole has been trying his best to cover up the traces, but the effect is not good. The white dragon saw that the Highgarden army stopped, and Cole also ordered to rest for a while. He tied the horse under the tree and sat down quietly, wanting to take a nap for a while. Anyway, the white dragon was watching. He closed his eyes, but fell asleep. The body and the brain are completely isolated. When he opened his eyes, it was already night. The memories brought by the white dragon flooded into his mind, and his face turned pale in an instant. Damn it, why didn't you remind me earlier, white dragon? Cole felt a sense of grievance in his heart, and his mind was stunned, but he had no time to think about anything else. The enemy had gone around in front of them without knowing when, and was now coming this way. Fortunately, he woke up in time, otherwise they would be caught off guard. Go forward or go back. The enemy divided its troops on both sides. In an instant, he had to choose. After all, he was still a human being. He would get tired and make mistakes. Rushing forward, estimating the number of people in front and behind in the sky, he decisively chose to go forward. Seeing Cole leading the way, everyone followed him to break through. Soon the two armies exchanged hands. Cole hit a cavalryman in the face with a sword, and at this time another cavalryman passed by him. Cole turned around to avoid the lance, stretched out his hand, and grabbed the man, and elbowed him with his wrist armor, and the man fainted instantly. The two swords flashed like flowing light, strong and fierce, and the warhorse under him also showed great power. He rushed straight ahead and actually entered the belly of the enemy. Such fighting power really frightened people, and the horses retreated one after another, until a knight in dark green glazed pottery armor came forward with a spear. Under the moonlight, the rose on the armor could be vaguely seen. Under the fierce horse, the cloak was awe-inspiring, and the iron hooves were clattering, like a galloping iron man. Cole stared at the lance, and leaned forward to avoid it. The two flashed like the wind. The lance suddenly rose sideways above Cole's head, which was extremely thrilling, but he still dodged it. This scene also shocked the Green Knight. He tightened the reins, slowed down the charge, and then turned his horse's head and chased back. One stab, one slash, and then took down two oncoming knights. At this time, the violent horse hoof sound behind him rang again. Cole did not need to look back, it was the Green Knight. He pulled away, and his lance missed again. The Green Knight simply threw away his lance, drew his long sword from his waist, and rode his horse towards him. With a ping, the two swords collided with each other. Fortunately, Cole still had a sword and swung it. The Green Knight was also very agile. He took off the sword that was colliding with Cole, and swung it to block. With a bang, the sound of swords rang again. The two of them fought back and forth, chopping, slashing, stabbing, and lifting. Cole attacked from the left and right, and the knight also pulled up his shield to block all of Cole's attacks. Every time he seized the opportunity, he would make a fatal attack. He was shocked by the strong fighting power of this person, and Garland was also amazed at the enemy's agility. The long sword went straight through, and the opponent swung his shield to hit him. A sword light came from behind the shield first. Cole followed the sword, and raised his left sword lightly. Garland felt a shock in his palm, and the sword in his hand almost flew out. Such a strong force. Garland was secretly shocked. Before he could hold the sword tightly, his neck suddenly felt cold. He shrank tightly and just avoided a fatal killing move. Cole failed to hit him with one blow, and then swung his sword again. Garland hurriedly held up his shield to block it. With a snap, the rounds of the shield inlaid with fine steel actually cracked. The two walked and fought, their eyes fixed on the enemy. After more than a dozen exchanges, Cole gradually gained the upper hand. Few people could resist the strong and persistent attack for a long time, and the knight's movements became slower and slower. Another sword hit Garland this time, but it was blocked by the armor, and he was not seriously injured. After several exchanges, Garland became more and more exhausted. Suddenly, Cole's horse shook, and was tripped by a stone. He knelt on his knees, and fell off the horse. Throwing away the sword, and protecting his head, Cole rolled on the ground for a distance. When he wanted to get up, a black shadow had already covered him. It was the Green Knight holding a sword, and the tip of his sword was pointed directly at Cole. Cole couldn't help but laugh in his heart. His words turned out to be a warning. He didn't expect to fall off his horse so quickly. The sword didn't swing. The Green Knight turned over and dismounted, supported Cole, and asked, "Are you not hurt?" Cole's heart trembled. Cole looked at him in confusion, only to see the Green Knight nodded slightly. Cole stammered, "Thank you." He looked back, and saw that he was already at a dead end. He even lost his pace in the fight. He staggered to his feet. There were waves of horses' hooves around him, and several figures surrounded him. Cole was in a desperate situation. The sword was picked up by the Green Knight, and Cole was exhausted. The Green Knight took off his helmet, and threw Cole's sword behind him. "You can't escape. Give up resistance. Lord Tyrell, he is Cole Julius." One of the cavalrymen behind him shouted, and Cole looked, and saw that it was Mado. "You are a smart man. Stannis can't win. Be loyal to His Majesty Renly, and he will forgive your mistakes." Garland stepped forward. Cole coughed lightly, took a few steps back, and then laughed. "Aren't you too confident to talk about victory now? Do you think, with these people in Storm's End, there is still hope of winning? If you think you can win by burning food, then unfortunately, Highgarden's fleet has already sailed north of Lambrune River." Garland shook his head. "If you are as stubborn as Stannis, you know what is waiting for you." He chuckled twice. "Then you must protect the ship, and don't let it be burned to ashes again. As for surrender, why don't you surrender to His Majesty Stannis? Stannis is not worthy of our support." "Really? But he personally put the sword in my hand, and then declared me a legitimate knight of the Seven Kingdoms, and gave me a surname. When I drifted from the sea without knowing whether I was alive or dead, it was Shireen Baratheon who asked the Maester to save me. Whether it is to repay a favor or to be loyal to him, I will fight for Stannis in this battle." Cole looked at them. "We have different paths, sir. I do not know your name, but I hope we will meet again." He leaped off the cliff, and Garland rushed up. Below him, it was pitch black, like the mouth of an abyss. "He is a knight," Garland said to the man beside him. "I did not expect Stannis to have such a man." Chapter 81, The Brave Garland. As he slowly descended, he seemed to have a pair of white wings, but the wings seemed to be struggling. He didn't know whether Camillo and the others had rushed out. When people are unlucky, even drinking water will get stuck in their teeth. The white dragon was pulling Cole with all his strength. Horses are indeed unreliable, but dragons are reliable. But this time, he was completely separated from the team, but he also got a new piece of news. Renly was going to use ships to transport food. He recalled the map, and found that the location of the Lambrune River was exactly that. It flowed through Highgarden, and then to Long Table Castle and Green Valley City, and finally passed through the Royal Forest, and joined the Wind River, and finally merged into Blackwater Bay. No, the Highgarden fleet could not sail directly to the royal forest. The Wind River was shallow and difficult to sail, so they must have stopped their ships in the area of Green Valley City and then switched to human and horse transportation. Cole's size was still too much for the White Dragon. Fortunately, there were concave and convex rocks between the cliffs to land on, so they first found a landing point, and then the White Dragon took him down slowly and rested for a while. The cliff was indeed very high, almost a sheer cliff. Finally they returned to the flat ground. The White Dragon continued to fly high, and Cole walked eastward. A group of cavalry gathered again, but they found that a very important person did not appear. For a moment, everyone's mind was extremely depressed. Only one person said a few words loudly, and then the cavalry followed him into the darkness. The pursuers behind were still pressing. The sun rose and set several times. A round of battle had just taken place under Storm's End. The enemy attacked the city at night. The heavy walls were like weeping fish beams, and the bloodstains that had not dried were dripping down. Stannis personally supervised the battle all night and had just rested. But just after lying down for a while, he was awakened by a nightmare. It was a dead silent Storm's End, and everyone's face was gloomy, just like the gargoyles in Dragonstone. He saw the proud wind sinking to the bottom of the sea and the flag of Highgarden flying above the castle. After waking up, the sweat had already soaked his younger generation. The fire in his room had gone out at some point. He stood up and suddenly felt a little cold. At this time, there was a knock on the door. Adrian Celtiger walked into the room with an old step. "Your Majesty, this is not very good news," he said to Stannis. "So what happened?" "Sir Cole Julius seems to have surrendered to your brother Renly." Lord Celtiger pondered for a moment. Now the child of the Bar-Ammon family is being tied up under the city wall by them. With the weak light, Celtiger could see that Stannis' face was not very good. He continued, "This news has a great impact on our morale. That kid is almost said to be a savior by people. Well, I already know. Savior is just some foolish words, like the stories told by the bards." He acted calmly. Celtiger thought silently in his heart, "But you are also the savior in the mouths of those Queen's party, Your Majesty." After Celtiger left, Stannis called out to the door, "Davin." A squire walked in. "Your Majesty, what do you want?" "Go call Melisandre and ask the servants to light the stove." Stannis told him. Squire Dale took the order and went out. When the fire in the bedroom was lit, a red-robed figure came in and greeted him personally. "Your Majesty." Stannis sat in front of the chair. "Just now Celtiger brought me a message." The old man is always in a gloomy mood. "Although he didn't ask me to surrender, I know that he doesn't think I can win." "Your Majesty, what are you worried about?" Melisandre came over. "Do you know who is shouting under the castle now? I heard that Sir Julius, who you predicted, has been killed by Renly's knights. I asked the archers to shoot arrows, but the more I did so, the more they thought I was afraid. He was praised as a savior, which was a serious blow to our morale. You predicted that he was the one who killed Renly, but now we don't even know whether he is dead or alive." Melisandre stopped by the fire. "This news comes from the enemy's mouth. Can you believe it? My patience is enough, my lady. If your Lord of Light does not show up, I will do it my own way. If we waste time here, the only one who will benefit will be the guy sitting on the Iron Throne." Stannis stared at the back of the red-robed woman. Her skirt turned slightly, and she turned around slowly. "Your Majesty, Renly's death is near." With a puff, the red robe actually fell down. In the camp full of flags and tents, the sound of the wind moved the golden-bottomed stag flag in front of the tent. The traveling merchants, prostitutes, and grooms, the patrolling cavalry, and the spearmen. There were also the knights riding on their war horses, wearing helmets and armor, looking majestic. A knight in dark green armor, with a helmet around his waist, came to the main tent in the middle camp. In the main tent, he saw his brother-in-law, King Renly Baratheon. His younger brother Loras followed closely beside the king, and of course his sister Marguerite Tyrell. "Your Majesty." Garland knelt in front of Renly and saluted. Renly pulled him up with a smile on his face. "Thank you for your hard work, Sir Garland. You have done a great deed. Second brother, they all say that you personally shot Sir Julius off his horse." Little Rose Marguerite smiled like a flower, with sweet dimples on her cheeks. Compared with her sister Rose of Highgarden and her brother Knight of Flowers, Garland only has a nickname Garland the Brave given by his eldest brother. His reputation in the Seven Kingdoms is not as prominent as his brother, and he has never liked to participate in those so-called honorary competitions. He shook his head. He fell off the horse by himself. I think he was frightened by your momentum, Renly said with a smile. I have to think carefully now, whether to wait for Ser Barristan or let you be my last rainbow guard. Ser Barristan Selmy is the bravest man in the Seven Kingdoms, your majesty. Garland doesn't want to be a king's guard. It is said that the Knights of Highgarden are brave and honorable. Loras, and you have proved this. Garland, if it were not for protecting your majesty, I would go there in person. Loras said. Garland couldn't help but think of the person who jumped off the cliff that night. He sent people to look for him, but they didn't find the body. But it should be impossible to survive after falling from such a high cliff. But when he thought of what he said, he felt strange again. Renly set up a banquet to welcome Garland. The knights and nobles raised their glasses and drank more, eating pork sausage and bacon, steak, and onions. Garland frowned slightly, not because he was dissatisfied with the banquet, but he thought that their army's food crisis had not been solved yet, so it was a feast. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 80 To the Missing Onion Knight. The crowned stag of Fiery Heart looked like a burning flame in the fierce wind. But this flame seemed to be only admiring itself. The soldiers on the castle felt a chill running down their spines, and this chill also blew into their hearts. A dark cloud seemed to cover the sky above Storm's End. Morale is really mysterious. High morale seemed to fill their bodies with boiling blood, and they only felt that the future was bright and open. But low morale made the castle look lifeless. This decadent trend was from top to bottom. Compared with Storm's End, Renly's army on the periphery was just the opposite. In one day, they had launched 3 waves of sieges, and even climbed up to Storm's End once. It was Stannis who personally led his troops to put out fires everywhere to stabilize the war. After a short rest, someone came to persuade them to surrender from the bottom of the city. Stannis directly ordered people to shoot arrows. When both sides were silent, he returned to rest. Night had just fallen when the sound of horns blew outside the city. This sound had lasted for 2 nights. The city was attacked during the day, and the people in the city were not allowed to rest at night. Hearing this sound now, he felt anxious and angry. Stannis propped himself up and shouted to the squire, Davin. There was no sound. He shouted a few times before he heard a thump outside the door, as if armor hit the wall. The squire stumbled in, his hand on the helmet. The child had been running with Stannis for a day and was exhausted. Your Majesty, what do you want? Where is your father? I didn't see him. Dale shook his head, but I think he should be resting in his room. Stannis nodded. Go and call him, and tell him that the king has a mission for him. The squire ran out for a long time, but came back alone. Your Majesty, I didn't find him. The Onion Knight Davos Seaworth seemed to have evaporated from the face of the earth, and disappeared in the castle. Until dawn, there was no sign of him. The next day, Stannis sat in his study with a gloomy face. A voice in his mind told him that Davos might have escaped or betrayed him. Before he could figure it out, the siege horn sounded on the wall. Stannis asked his servants to quickly put on his armor. Dale's expression was also a little empty, because it was not just Stannis who thought that Davos had escaped. Now the news had spread in the castle. The Onion Knight had escaped, so was there any need to continue the battle? After Stannis finished putting on his armor, he walked to the hall. At this time, the Maester Pylus was walking towards his room. He shouted to Stannis, Your Majesty. The king nodded slightly, then walked straight away without looking back. This siege was very difficult, and several times people climbed up the wall from the ladder. The battle ended in about half an hour, although the losses on the defenders were much smaller. For Stannis, who was already outnumbered, every time he lost a person, he would have difficulty getting a replacement. When he returned to the room to take off his armor, he held back his curse. I will never forgive any betrayer, never. Davin didn't know who he was scolding, but he felt uneasy and uneasy in his heart. After a while, a man with a cane came to the outside of the king's tower. Beside him was a beautiful red-haired woman who helped him walk. It was the Starks. Recently, Eddard's injury has improved, and he can get out of bed and walk. Although Catelyn is worried about her eldest son Robb, she can't leave her sick husband alone at Storm's End, so she asked the captain of the guard, Ser Moran Harris, to sail north to pass the news to Robb, and he stayed to take care of Eddard. Stannis met with Duke Eddard. He asked his servant Dale to bring a chair for Eddard to sit down. "This is the only good news I have heard recently, Lord Stark. I hope my maester has healed your leg." Eddard wanted to stand up and salute, but his body could not support him. He could only express his gratitude. "Thank you very much, Lord Stannis. Maester Pylus's medical skills are superb. My leg is no longer a problem. I came to say goodbye to you, my lord." Eddard continued, "I hope you can send a small boat to take me and my lady to White Harbor. When I return to Winterfell to reorganize the troops, I will immediately go south. But it is hard to say whether Storm's End can hold out until his support." Eddard couldn't help but think of the last siege of Storm's End. At that time, Robert was injured in the decisive battle with Rhaegar, and he had to lead the army. He originally intended to take King's Landing first, but the Lannisters had already taken it first. After taking over King's Landing without losing a single soldier, he quickly led his troops south to Storm's End. The current situation of Storm's End is so similar to that of 10 years ago. Lord Stark, you and I both know that I should sit on the Iron Throne. Yes, according to etiquette, you are Robert's heir. Although our relationship is not the same as that between my brother Robert and you, as long as you are willing to bring the army of the North to help, I promise that, when I take back the throne, I will reserve a place for you in the Royal Council." Stannis said very solemnly. "Thank you for your trust, my lord. Winter is coming, and I should be with the people of the North. This is the mission of the Stark family from generation to generation." He no longer wanted to stay in the South for a moment. The wind here made him uncomfortable. Although the North was bitterly cold, it was the world of Starks. They grew up there, generation after generation, for thousands of years. "My daughter Shireen Baratheon seems to be about the same age as your daughter. I will send a ship to take you to Dragonstone, and then I hope she can stay to accompany Shireen," Stannis said. "Leave Arya behind." No, Eddard quickly rejected this idea. He knew how much Arya missed Winterfell. "My lord, why don't you let me stay?" At this time, Catelyn, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. "I can accompany your lady." Stannis thought about it, then nodded. "You have a smart lady, Lord Stark." The Starks walked out of the tower. The conversation with Stannis did not seem as pleasant as they had imagined. The lord was very wary of them. After they left, another guest came to Stannis' tower. She needed Stannis to send someone to take him out of Storm's End. Originally, Stannis wanted Davos to take her out by boat, but the Onion Knight seemed to have disappeared. Melisandre has been searching in the flames for the past 2 days. Did she misinterpret it? She asked countless questions. "Davin." Stannis called the servant. "Go and call Saladin to see me." Not long after the servant left, there was a knock on the door. "Your Majesty." The voice of Maester Pylus sounded outside the door. Chapter 83, Immortal Cole. That night, they fought hard, and the enemy came in waves. A soldier raised a stone and smashed it against the wall. As soon as he stretched his head, he heard a stray arrow breaking through the air. He only heard a whistle and lost consciousness. Soldiers raised their shields and gathered under the city wall to slowly put the long ladder up the city wall. But the people on the city wall would never let them succeed. As soon as the ladder head rose, they pushed it with their hands and hit it with weapons. The ladder head was made of metal into a row of sharp and heavy iron hooks. Once they got close, they pounced on it like the sharp teeth of a tiger. The people on the city could only avoid it. When the long ladder fell, they tried to push it, but it was already firmly nailed to the city. The people below held up the shield and began to climb up one after another. When the enemy approached the city wall, countless blades and spears were waiting for them. Even if the shield was raised high, it could not stop the dense attack, or the wrist, waist, and legs were hit, or being stabbed with thousands of holes, one after another. People howled and fell from the wall. With a loud bang, countless stones flew into the castle. The people on the wall were not to be outdone. With the whoosh of a powerful crossbow, the crossbow arrows as big as a bowl were pointed directly at the dense crowd under the wall, and then there were wails. There was a sudden roar on the wall, and it seemed that someone rushed up there, and then people climbed the city one after another. At this time, the soldiers in the staircase under the city also rushed into the wall, and the flames that the climbers had just started were instantly dispersed by the large crowd. Cole stood on the giant tower of Storm's End, and the fierce battle below was in his eyes. He didn't expect Renly to have launched such a fierce attack. This level of siege was full of pressure on both the attackers and defenders. The moment he returned to Storm's End, Stannis held a great council, and all the knights and nobles were present. Naturally, Cole followed him without knowing why. He came back with the Onion Knight, or it could be said that the Onion Knight took a boat to pick him up. The two rode all the way back from Shipbreaker Bay to the lower cape of Storm's End, and then were taken back to the city by soldiers in a basket. Stannis clearly remembered the surprise in Melisandre's eyes. Of course, there was also the surprise of the knights and nobles in the hall. Of course, all this started with a bird. That day, a big raven flew out of Storm's End, and before it flew far, it was attacked by a white shadow in the sky. The terrifying aura instantly made the raven stop resisting. The raven was picked up by Davos, and then he handed it to Maester Pyrrhus, who read the letter, and then Davos came. Maester Pyrrhus had always wanted to give the letter to the king, but he had never had the chance. The white dragon did not find the cavalry, so Cole had to return to Storm's End first, and at the same time he told Stannis the news that Renly was going to transport grain by water. Renly's army could no longer stand on the city wall. This was already the fourth day, and they could not withstand such a high-intensity attack. But his 40,000 men could only stare blankly at the city wall, which was too high and too thick. The city gate was connected to the moat, which was difficult to approach. The few places where one could climb down to the foot of the city were also high and thick, and there was nothing they could do. There were only 4,000 people in the castle, 1/10 of this. But a Storm's End instantly made up for the difference in numbers. Moreover, the sea route could continuously supply Storm's End. Renly had already sent people to the arbor. This time, the Red Wine family did not respond to his call. Highgarden was located inland, and within the Tyrell family's coordination scope, only the Red Wine family of the Arbor could form a fleet. The Red Wine family had always been the marine guarantee of the Reach, and their family fleet was as famous as the Royal Fleet and the Iron Fleet in Westeros. And the wine produced in the Arbor was the best wine in Westeros. The family flag of the Red Wine family is a blue grape flag, which is derived from this. Their family is both powerful and rich. However, Renly's reason for raising an army is to attack King's Landing, so Red Wine did not respond. It is speculated that it is probably because his sons are in King's Landing at this time, in the hands of Cersei and Joffrey. Without the navy of the Arbor, Renly can't do anything to Stannis at sea, and they can only requisition fishing boats to transport grain. After the siege, Stannis convened a small council. Cole and Davos came together, and happened to meet Maester Pyrrhus at the door. Although Davos gave him the raven, as soon as he picked it up, the Onion Knight did not have a good impression of the Maester. Before the king came, everyone in the small meeting greeted each other, and the atmosphere was very harmonious. Stannis came in accompanied by Melisandre. The reason for holding this small meeting was because of the news brought by Cole. Cole unfolded the map he brought with him. This is the map I drew when I was leading the cavalry into battle. He pointed to the Dawn Mountains. Here I had an encounter with the enemy cavalry and was separated from the team, but I also gained a piece of news. His finger turned to Highgarden. After the food was burned, Renly seemed to have gathered food again. This time he doesn't seem to plan to come from the Rose Avenue, but to transport the food by water. The rivers are connected together, just enough to reach the Royal Forest not far from Bronze Gate City. He continued, but from what I found in the King's Wood, the water of the Wender River seems to be drying up, and many sections of the river are difficult to navigate, so I guess they should transport the food to the upper reaches of the Wender River, and then use wagons to transport it. Cole looked at Stannis at the end. They use water transportation. It must be that the food is an urgent need. If we can intercept this batch of food, then the army under the castle will collapse without our help. Stannis was also staring at the map. His fleet was stationed outside Shipbreaker Bay, responsible for guarding the fleet of the Arbor Island. It was also his last retreat. If they failed to defend Storm's End, they could turn back to the sea. If this army was sent away, it would mean that the retreat was also cut off. At that time, the only way was to defend Storm's End. But it is too far for the fleet to bypass Dawn and sail into the river of Highgarden, isn't it? Said Sir Axel Florent. In his opinion, if they wanted to stop the enemy fleet, they could only let their fleet go all the way to the Manda River in Highgarden. Cole did not explain, he just waited quietly, waiting for Stannis' decision. He had done everything he should say and do. This would be a gamble. Renly would definitely put a lot of effort into transporting the grain this time, and it was very likely that this was fake news. Cole turned his gaze to Melisandre, only to see that her belly was slightly bulging. Chapter 84 Davos, Part 1. There was a little melancholy in his eyes. Compared with Stannis' iron-like look, and Melisandre's pretending to be indifferent eyes, these eyes made people feel friendly. He should be younger than his son, Mathis, but his words and deeds are far more mature than this age. Although they have both passed their 16-year-old name day, they should be treated as adults. Sir, you have never let me down. This is what the king said that day, of course, to the silver-haired young man. In the end, Stannis decided to let his fleet take risks, and at the same time, granted Sir Cole Julius the right to command the royal fleet. The king promised that, if he could win this battle, he would retain the power of the navy and sit in the royal meeting. At this time, he was holding the medal on his chest. It was the symbol of Stannis' service as the Lord Admiral in King's Landing. It was given by his brother Robert himself, just like the territory of Dragonstone. Stannis was dissatisfied with not being the Prime Minister and being awarded the title of Storm's End. Renly did nothing but got Storm's End as a fief, while he could only get the desolate Dragonstone Island. This seemed extremely unfair to him. Davos couldn't help wondering, what would the king do to this Sir Cole? Like himself, get a forest for hunting red deer and a small castle? No, I don't think so. If so, wouldn't it be no different from King Robert Baratheon? Just like the crew said, he should be granted a large territory. Of course, he didn't dare to think too much about those crazier rumors, such as the reward of Storm's End. Would Stannis let outsiders occupy the Baratheons' ancestral land for thousands of years? Although Sir Cole did have great contributions. Shaking his head, Storm's End should be left to His Highness Shireen. He is the king's blood relative, and should rule the Stormlands. When the king has a new child, if it is a boy, he will be the heir and rule Dragonstone Island. The king made him the Lord of the Sea, and I think he would give him a territory by the sea. Cole was sitting on his black bess, surrounded by Valyrian's glory of Tidemark, Barrowman's swordfish, and Celtiga's red crab. Black Bess was inconspicuous among them, but Cole still chose this inconspicuous warship as the main ship. They traveled at night, and sailed from Shipbreaker Bay to Summerhall in a day and a night. Lord Valerian and Lord Celtiga were both left in Storm's End, which was his only request before taking over. Summerhall was originally the summer palace of the Targaryen family, but now only a piece of ruins remains. The castle was burned to ruins in the fire. It was a disaster for the Targaryen family and even the whole of Westeros. Sir Duncan the Tall, King Aegon V, and Prince Dragonfly all died here, and the last true dragon, Rhaegar Targaryen, was born in this fire. In order to celebrate the birth of his great-grandson Rhaegar, Aegon Targaryen V asked a pyromancer to try to hatch a dragon egg, but it eventually led to the tragedy of Summerhall, the sad place of the Targaryen family. Cole told the story, as if it was his own personal experience. Davos could feel the regret in his eyes. He sat on the ruins and sighed slightly. The Targaryen dynasty that once existed has now become history like Summerhall. These stories all come from an elder far away on the wall. King Mikarai had a total of 4 sons, the eldest son drunkard Darren, the second son Aerion the Bright Flame, the third son Aemon, and the fourth son Egon. Yes, this Aemon is Mr. Aemon on the wall. Mika's eldest and second sons are both useless. This is what Cole said to Davos. After all, one died of a venereal disease, and the other committed suicide by drinking wildfire, and not calling them mentally ill was already a respectable thing for them. Davos didn't know where Cole's sadness came from. To him, the history of the Targaryen family was just like the stories of the minstrels, just as a fun story before and after dinner. Yes, how could he know that Cole grew up listening to the stories of King Aegon v. Mr. Aemon always told him many things about Aegon. In Aemon's words, Aegon didn't seem like a high and mighty king, but an ordinary child. He dreamed of becoming a kingsguard since he was a child, which also influenced Cole to a certain extent at that time. However, his dream of becoming a kingsguard was soon ridiculed by his brothers on the wall. They laughed at him for dreaming of becoming a kingsguard despite his low status. So he cried and found Maester Aemon, and then the Maester told him the story of Ser Duncan the Tall. Sometimes the Maester calls me Egg. People get confused when they get old, even if they are knowledgeable Maesters. Cole said to Davos. Davos couldn't help but think of Maester Cresson on Dragonstone, who was also an old man. He couldn't help but feel sad for him. Maybe I'm old and will confuse my own sons. I have 7 children. I believe you have seen Davon. He is the king's squire. The Onion Knight pointed to a young man working there. That's Mathis, my 3rd child. He's a good fellow. I think he will be able to take charge soon. Cole praised. Davos just shook his head. They were obviously the same age. I heard that King Aegon hatched 7 dragon eggs here. Do you think it's somewhere in the ruins? He seemed to be suddenly interested. Many people have this idea. The price of a dragon egg can buy several ships across the narrow sea. I don't understand why a piece of stone can be sold so expensively. Dragons have long been extinct. You have to try it. What if it succeeds? Davos smiled when he saw him. Then he left. He searched around in Midsummer Hall like a child catching insects. Only then did Davos feel a little childish in him. He was only half the age of Stannis, but he took on the most important task in this war. After 2 days of rest in Summer Hall, the army set out on the 3rd day. He led a team of 3,000 people through the gorge of the Dawn Mountains and headed straight for the Lambroon River. He separated the few cavalrymen, crossed the river, and headed for the Rose Road. Then he laid iron chains and ropes on the surface of the Lambroon River. At the same time, he sent people to cut trees and build rafts. The next day, a fleet came straight down the river and was blocked by iron chains. They quickly attacked on rafts and seized the ships. On the road, this unit may not be strong, but on the water, they are first-class elite soldiers. After seizing the boats, they threw all the transported food and baggage into the river, then loaded people, and fought and robbed on the river. They became pirates on the upper reaches of the Lambroon River. Chapter 85 Davos, Part 2. He likes to use fire too much, even on the water. The cavalrymen attracted the enemy's attention on the Rose Avenue upstream. In order to transport the food this time, Renly even sent all the troops stationed at Bitter Bridge to the upper reaches of the Lambroon River. They cut wood to build a camp and a port. Davos thought that their target would be this military camp, but Cole set his sights on the birthplace of the fleet. They seized the boats, blocked the river, and went straight to Highgarden. The Lambroon River in this section was full of boats, large merchant ships that could sail on the sea, and small boats used for fishing, all docked on the river bank and looked around, forming a string. The boats with blazing flames rushed directly to the river bank. In an instant, the entire river bank was set on fire. The flames even spread to the barracks on the shore. The fire caused panic among the people. They drove across the river and rushed directly to the camp. The barracks that were originally strictly guarded had already been in chaos. They didn't even spend much effort to capture it. He burned Renly's food again. Davos looked at the young man standing on the deck. They had retreated to the sea, and they didn't even encounter a few attacks. The strong sea breeze blew up the strands of hair on his forehead. He leaned against the railing alone. He seemed to like looking at the distant sea, watching the waves rise and fall, and watching the seabirds glide. Sir Davos, it's not polite to secretly look at others from behind. He turned his head, holding half a rye bread in his hand. Davos walked aside. It turned out that he was not looking at the sea, but feeding the fish. Look, what a good nest. He pointed to the sea. Building a nest? Oh, that means using bait to attract fish. Before fishing, you put bait at the fishing spot. Building a nest for fish is a good way of saying it. But if you want to catch big fish, you can't use rye bread to catch them. When I was a child, I heard that someone saw mermaids on Eastwatch, and I thought about fishing with a fishing rod. Sir, have you ever seen mermaids in your long sailing? Davos found that the naval commander seemed to be very interested in some legends. From the dragons in Summerhall to the mermaids now. Even if he kept talking about White Walkers, he would not feel strange. So, sir, are you fishing for mermaids? Cole raised the bread in his hand and couldn't help but smile. If mermaids also eat rye bread, then so be it. He threw the bread directly into the sea. Where are we now? We have already left the Dawn Sea. The island we just passed is the Isle of Estermond. This is the territory of the Estermond family. They are now fighting for Lord Renly. I heard that the head of the family is a timid and cautious person. Soon, they will turn to support your majesty and fight for the Lord of Light. But Davos thought, the enemy has not been defeated yet, and those adults of noble birth and superior status simply ignored him when he brought the king's oral order. He was turned away at many castles. If Stannis was defeated, would he surrender to the enemy? No, everything he had was given to him by Stannis. The ship moved forward, and a white shadow followed behind it. It dived into the water, and soon caught a fish. He threw the fish up, and then blew a breath of fire to roast the fish, until it was charred, and then swallowed the fish in midair. The ship sailed all the way to Shipbreaker Bay. Stannis personally greeted them on the city wall, and also convened a large meeting to summon all the Night Lords to the Hall of Storm's End. Davos saw that Earl Valerian and Earl Celtigar both looked impatient. Their council was only half open, and soon the siege horn sounded. The knights in charge of the city defense quickly left the council, and the rest of the nobles followed the king to the tower. The central tower of Storm's End was tall, and the king usually supervised the battle again. The situation on the city wall could be seen at a glance. I saw Renly's army appearing densely under the city wall like waves. Countless flags fluttered, crowned stags, golden roses of Highgarden, red and gold foxes surrounded by blue and white stones, and hunters in red clothes with green backgrounds. From the city wall, it seemed that there were only people below, and even the color of the ground was temporarily covered by the crowd. They are going to attack the city with their entire army. Lord Celtigar's words were trembling. Stannis also looked solemn. Davos was thinking that it seemed that without food and grass, they had no choice but to make a desperate bet. He saw the catapults being pushed to the bottom of the city. Although the crossbows and archers on the city wall were constantly shooting, they could not reach those equipment. The catapults were loaded with stones, and the wooden arms were raised, and the stones fell on the city wall. A pit was directly smashed at the point where the stones fell, and countless stones fell, but the walls of Storm's End were thick enough. Davos also noticed that Cole's expression was a little complicated. The catapults continued to hit from morning to noon. The soldiers retreated to the arrow towers and stairways, and only shot arrows from the slits. Occasionally, people holding shields walked back and forth between the walls. At noon, smoke rose from the walls. He wants to tell me, do they still have food? Stannis said at that time. Before the smoke had dispersed, a messenger arrived under the wall. It was Alliser Florent, the Earl of Brightwater. Stannis' queen, Selise Florent, was his niece. And now he sent such a person to Storm's End, and no one knew what Renly meant. The king met with Earl Alliser in the attic of the tower, and he bowed first. Your Majesty Stannis, how are you these days? He was a thin old man, but his hair and beard were neatly trimmed. Davos was looking at this noble earl from the queen's family. According to blood relationship, he should be closer to Stannis, but now he is Renly's envoy. Are you here on behalf of Renly? The king asked directly. Lord Alliser smiled appropriately. I come for honor, your majesty. Really? Then what does your king have to say? Tell me. Your majesty, you and Lord Renly are brothers. You are both blood relatives of King Robert. I said that, as long as he still wears that rebellious crown, I will not recognize him as my brother. Unless he is willing to take off that stupid thing, I will never forgive him. The king's words were very decisive. Brothers should not. I don't want to hear you chattering about those words for fools. Just tell Renly what he wants. Lord Allister's mouth opened and closed, but he didn't say a word. He took out a letter from his sleeve and handed it to Stannis. The king opened the letter. He looked at the letter and snorted coldly. Does he intend to provoke me into a fight? He threw the letter aside. I should tie you to a catapult and throw you out, but my wife is of House Florent. Tell Renly to come to the sea if he wants a fight, or to climb Storm's End himself. He will pay for insulting me so many times. Chapter 86. The situation is blurred. Cole could see that Lord Alistair Florent was initially prepared to persuade Renly and Stannis to reconcile. This old guy thought too highly of his position. Did he think he could use the pressure of an elder to make Stannis respect him? As expected, these were all his own decisions. Renly asked him to declare war on Stannis. Sure enough, Renly launched a fierce attack on Storm's End that night. Burning the food left him with no way to retreat. If he failed to capture Storm's End, he would have to retreat in disgrace. Twice. Exactly twice. Lord Mace Tyrell knew that after this battle, he would become a laughingstock among the people of the Seven Kingdoms. He hated why the kid named Cole Julius didn't die. Why didn't he die? Cole had no idea that he was almost becoming the inner demon of a certain inflatable fish lord. He hurriedly walked through the corridors of the castle, but was stopped by an unexpected person. Lady Catelyn. Sir. Catelyn greeted him. Lady Stark, it's not safe now. You'd better stay in the castle. Catelyn looked at him. You are a knight appointed by my uncle Brynden Tully himself. Cole stopped. Yes, ma'am. He didn't understand why she was telling him this. I need your help, sir. Lord Stannis promised to send my husband and daughter back to the north, but there are still no ships for us to leave. Maybe the king is too busy, ma'am. After the battle, I will help you tell him. Don't worry, His Majesty Stannis is the one who values promises the most. He turned and wanted to leave. Catelyn held him back. No, sir. I know how many people are outside. I have seen it myself in Renly's camp. You will not be his opponent. Please, send my child and husband away. I know you can do it. Forgive me for my incompetence. I can't do this for you, ma'am. He walked straight to the aisle. Catelyn could only stand there and watch his back go away. The battle started in the early morning and ended at dusk. Under pressure, Stannis put all his troops on the wall, rotating them in waves. Cole was walking down the wall covered in blood. The enemy blew the horn to withdraw the troops only after they showed signs of collapse and escape. He just caught up with the last wave of siege. Wearing heavy armor and standing on the wall, Cole only remembered that he cut down 6 people. It should be a death sentence to fall from such a towering wall. They walked back to their tower with a clatter. Their room was on the 3rd floor of the inner castle. The 2nd floor was the hall. It had long been a place for soldiers to rest. It was like a messy barracks. Hundreds of people gathered here. There were some beddings on the ground, and the wounded were lying there. Now the whole Storm's End was full of people, whether in the corridors or the corridors. Only the resting place of the noble knights on the 3rd floor felt a little empty. The top floor was the king's room. Occasionally, the wounded were seen being carried on stretchers, with blood dripping all over the floor. A soldier bumped into Cole rashly and fell to the ground. He stood up in panic. Sir Knight, I'm not. Cole waved his hand to indicate that it was okay. Soldiers and companions stood by the wall and made way for Cole. Walking up the stairs to the 3rd floor, he met Earl Valerian head on. He snorted coldly and walked away. After walking a few more steps, they happened to meet Count Celtiger again. The old nobleman smiled and said, Sir Julius. Count Celtiger, I brought some good wine from Crab Island. Sir, you just came down from the city wall. Why don't you taste it? I heard from the merchant that it was produced in Kingting Island. A barrel cost me several gold royals. Of course, it's an honor. The two walked into his attic and saw a girl inside. She looked young. Oh, let me introduce you. This is Melina. She is a good girl. We plan to hold a wedding after the war. I wonder if Sir Julius can come and see us then. Go pour wine for the adults. He ordered the girl. The beautiful girl poured the mellow and bright red wine into the copper cup with a wine pot. Of course, Cole was not surprised by the old earl's superiority. This girl might come from a family of a small noble under the fiefdom of Celtiger, or she might be born a commoner, or even a prostitute. A man always needs a woman by his side. The older he is, the more so. Melina was pouring wine for him, and he rubbed her hands. The girl lowered her head and seemed absent-minded, and her eyes had been looking somewhere for a long time. He patted Melina's back, startling the girl and screaming softly. The old earl cursed. Stupid bitch, didn't you see that the wine has flowed on me? Ah, sir, I didn't mean it. The girl was panicked, tears welling up in her eyes. What are you still looking at? Help me wipe the wine clean. Do you know how precious these wines are? Even if you and your lowly father are sold, you can't get enough of this wine." He turned around with an apologetic look in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Sir Julius. This lowly person ruined your mood." Cole took a sip. He didn't know whether the wine was good or bad. Anyway, it tasted almost the same. He didn't drink it often. He preferred to drink boiled hot water and beer. If Count Celtiga knew that the people he was hosting actually used high quality wine from the Arbor to compare with cheap ale, he would probably despise them greatly. "No problem. I should thank you for your good wine," Cole praised. The old earl smiled like an old chrysanthemum, and his face was wrinkled. "It would be better if it was paired with some crab pie and roasted pigeon. Unfortunately, when Arking asked me to transport food, he strictly required me to transport only rye and fish. The king seems to neglect enjoyment. I have lived for so long and have learned something. It is better for people to eat more good food when they are young. I also love delicious food. I even worked as a cook for a while." Cole noticed that there was a flash of contempt in his eyes, but it was quickly covered by a smile. "I don't know who has the honor to eat the food made by the legendary Night Lord Julius. Some greedy guys. Those guys on the Great Wall are really greedy. People are always greedy, just like men like women. The king is reluctant to let women enter his camp, although he has one with him. But if he wants the soldiers to fight, he must either give them women or food. I guess the castle may not have much food in it. We are loyal to His Majesty Stannis, and we should help him solve his problems." The old earl said, "You are the naval commander authorized by him personally. I think I should tell you first that I will be responsible for continuing to deliver food to His Majesty." Cole's wine glass was hanging in his hand. "His Majesty the King seems to have sent said Avars to transport food. Oh, look at me, this old fool. I want to assist the Onion Knight, so I want to ask you for a warrant." Damn, Cole cursed in his heart. This old guy wants to escape. Chapter 87, Escape. Who does this bastard think he is? Count Celtiga cursed. With his lowly status, he is not worthy to sit with me. He picked up a stick and staggered to the girl. "And you don't think I didn't see that your eyes were almost all on him? It's true that lowly people are always attracted to each other. I really should have asked you to take off all your clothes and send you to him. Isn't he pretending to be serious? He even asked His Majesty the King for instructions. He thinks I can't hear his excuses. I have slept with more women than he has." With a snap, the stick hit the girl, but she could only kneel and sob, and didn't even dare to cry out loud. "Stinky bitch." He kicked her, but her foot slipped, and she fell to the ground. He wailed in pain. Cole returned to his room and took off his armor. Even among the people in the castle, few people thought they would win. However, with such a strong offensive today, it seems that fear and pressure will soon spread throughout the castle, and more people will want to surrender. The night was quite peaceful. Renly did not attack the city at night. It was not until dawn that the sound of the horn was heard. The enemy's offensive was as strong as before, and the casualties on both sides increased. The shouts and screams continued for 3 days. Both sides were exhausted. Those who came down from the wall were either seriously injured or exhausted. Cole hid in the tower to fish. Others did not have confidence in Stannis, but he did. If he could not win, he still had Melisandre's magic plug-in. One shot and Renly would be GG. He pretended to wipe the sword there, and suddenly someone ran down from the top, and then more, and more people ran over. Cole hurriedly caught one, but before he could ask, he saw a body rolling down from the ladder. It looked like he had just died. Needless to say, Cole understood, and he threw it away, and turned around to run. At this time, a man rushed from the ladder. It was hard to tell whether he was a friend or an enemy by looking at his armor, but seeing him kick the corpse that was blocking his way, Cole stabbed him with his sword without saying anything. The man raised his shield to block, but was a moment too slow. Cole held the handle with his right hand and pushed the sword with his left hand, directly pushing him to the end of the corner of the building. He spat out a few mouthfuls of blood and fell to the ground. The wall was not the rout that Cole had expected, but the soldiers of both sides were fighting each other, with swords flashing and blood flying everywhere. The enemy occupied the ground at the ladder. No wonder those people wanted to escape, and now Cole was among the enemies. There were more than a dozen soldiers climbing up in this group, and Cole didn't have the heart to count them. He quickly picked up a fallen spear and stabbed it at an enemy who had his back turned towards him. The man screamed, and before he could turn around, he was drowned in countless swords. At this time, someone discovered Cole at the ladder, and 3 or 2 soldiers directly chopped him down with knives. Cole pulled back his spear and stabbed again, then quickly dodged and returned to the ladder. Suddenly, he bumped into something behind him. It turned out that reinforcement had arrived. Cole shouted, holding a sword in his hand, and then drew another sword and rushed forward. The moment he rushed out of the ladder, he cut down the 2 enemies blocking the way. This group of soldiers climbing the city wall was quickly drowned in the defenders, and at this time, one person just showed his head on the siege ladder at the wall. When he looked up, the Silver Knight met him head on. With a clang, he felt as if his head was hit by a hammer. The hand holding the ladder loosened instantly, and then he saw the blue sky. He was flying. The battle on the wall was fierce, but suddenly the city wall became chaotic. Cole stabbed another person with his sword, and his eyes were attracted by the movement under the wall. He saw countless soldiers who had gathered at the corner of the wall fleeing backwards. He even saw the enemies fighting among themselves, and there were cavalry galloping in the distance to chase the deserters. They ran away. They ran away. A sharp and loud voice rang in Cole's ears. Cole looked at the scattered enemies. The soldiers who were as fierce and strong as wolves just now were like lambs running around. Lord Julius, the king has issued an order. All knights must gather at the gate immediately. A messenger quickly found him. This was not surprising. After all, he was the only one dressed like this. The soldiers made way for him. Cole hurried to the gate. There had been a cavalry gathering here for a long time. There were about 500 people. In front of the army, Cole noticed Stannis in armor. Someone brought him a warhorse. The horse was also in armor. The attendant said loudly beside him, "Sir Julius, the king has appointed you as his vanguard officer." Cole barely heard his words clearly amid the neighing of horses and men. He understood what Stannis meant. If the enemy was defeated, he would naturally send troops to pursue, and the first to bear the brunt would be the cavalry of Storm's End. During this time, Cole could see the figures of many noble knights, and he could see their eager eyes. He gritted his teeth and pulled his horse to Stannis' side, only to see the king quickly order him to lead the troops to attack. Before he could respond, a knight holding the royal standard walked up to him, and the gate of the gatehouse slowly rose. With a boom, they lowered the drawbridge. Cole could only wave his sword and shout, "Charge!" Then he led the way and charged out. There was a group of soldiers gathered outside the drawbridge, but when the cavalry charged out, they were scattered in an instant. From the city wall, they looked like a colorful team, the crowned stag with flaming ambitions, the silver falcon with blazing flames, and the crab with a white background. The cavalry was like a sharp sword that penetrated the fleeing army, leaving corpses everywhere. In the chaos, white shadows flashed in the sky, and a pair of blue eyes looked up at the distant sky and the earth. Soon, the white dragon came to the chaotic army, and found a slowly retreating army. The army was flying the black crowned stag with gold edges, the golden rose with a green background, and the flag of the walking hunter. They retreated and resisted the chaotic army at the same time, and they looked very embarrassed. They charged forward, and there were people in all directions. As the leader, all the knights followed Cole and his half-white bird and half-fire deer flag. How to distinguish the direction in the chaos, at this moment, can only rely on luck. But this cavalry seemed to have eyes, and did not deviate in the chaos. It went straight to the enemy's most central king's flag. In the chaos, even Renly, who had more manpower, could not form a large army for the time being. He was seen riding on a horse in armor, with 7 rainbow guards beside him. His eyes and heart were as flustered as the battlefield at that time. He didn't even know what order to give for a while. It was still Earl Randall Tarley who was calm enough and quickly sent a team of cavalry out to stop the fleeing soldiers, and at the same time ordered the guards to escort the king to retreat. "Someone is chasing us." The yellow guard Demon Kui discovered the cavalry behind him. Renly naturally recognized the strange flag, and he even mocked Stannis for it. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's Stannis' pursuers." The Knight of Flowers pulled up the reins, turned around and called out, "Good Morrigan, Bryce Cullen. Come with me to stop the enemy." Chapter 88 3 Heroes vs. Cole. Wear the uniform of honor. Hold the fearless sword. Redeem the suffering soul. Free and proud knight. The battle flag flew high, the scales shone brightly, and the cloak turned into a long stream of colorful colors as the horse galloped. It was as if two waves with huge kinetic energy collided with each other. The leading waves were all jade-scaled silver armor. On one side, there was flat silver plate armor, a double-winged helmet, a black cloak embroidered with white silk and flying birds, and two swords in hand. On the other side, there was finely carved silver armor, a flower helmet, a rose hanging on the chest, a cloak embroidered with flowers, and a 12-foot lance in hand. Even if they had not met, they knew who was coming at a glance. The Knight of Flowers, Loras Tyrell. The Knight of Two Swords, Cole Julius. Unspoken, the generals met. The Knight of Flowers immediately grasped the lance tightly against his ribs. The tip of the lance was sharpened into a cone, and the lance body stood upright, like a crossbow arrow. At this moment, the world in front of him seemed to be the only one left, the knight running towards him. Cole held the rope in one hand and the sword in the other. It was not that he did not want to use the lance, but he was not used to it. Without professional training, using the lance might even hurt himself, such as dislocating his wrist. If he injured his arm on the battlefield, it would be better to retreat to the next best thing. It was definitely impossible to rush into someone's face, so Cole rode his horse to the side. The Knight of Flowers seemed to have targeted him, and rode his horse straight at him. The lance flashed past, and was easily dodged by Cole. Sorry, it is really difficult to hit him with the eye of time with such a single attack weapon. He kicked the horse's belly lightly, and leaned to the side of the Knight of Flowers. He drew his two swords, and used only his legs to stabilize the horse. Loras took the sword with his shield, but the rounds of the shield could not block all the killing moves, so he could only pull up the lance with a jerk. With a cracking sound, the blade slashed directly into the lance, penetrating more than half a foot. Cole pushed hard, and the Knight of Flowers felt his entire arm twisted by the lance. The lance was too heavy, so he pushed the lance, and then let go. The round shield hit the air, and Loras took the opportunity to draw the long sword from his waist. The sword did not come out of the body, but a flat stab was met in the face. The Knight of Flowers held the shield steady to meet it, but saw another sword from the side, with a crescent-shaped momentum, cold and sharp, like the waves of the vast sea, flying fast. There was a clang, and the sword came out of the body quickly. The two fine steel swords clashed fiercely. The Knight of Flowers felt that he was not resisting a sword, but a 1,000-pound weight. The pressure of thousands of mountains almost shook him off the horse. The shield and sword fell back. He kicked the spurs and rode away, temporarily pulling the distance between the two. Cole pulled the reins and chased closely, the horse's head shaking, and his body was unstable. The Knight of Flowers looked back, and a smile appeared under his armor. He was always confident in his horsemanship. He quickly circled, and was behind Cole in an instant. Cole turned to meet him, but was several beats too late. A shield was swung at him. With the help of the horse's sprint, the shield was so powerful that it was beyond human power. Loras thought that no matter if he blocked it with his arms or sword, he would be knocked off his horse. But the result was beyond his expectations. Cole leaned down and pressed against the horse's back. In a split second, he nimbly dodged the shield. The Knight of Flowers swung his sword in vain, turned around and slashed with his sword, but Cole's sword was one step faster. With a clang, he swung the sword right in the middle of his hood. The blade passed through the visor and cut his cheek. Blood and sweat flowed down his cheek, gathering into small drops at his chin, dripping into the armor. Loras's mind went blank. He felt a force tearing at him. His body swayed in the air. His sword had long since flown away from his hand. Only the knight's shield on his left hand was still firmly in his hand. Until he came across a green-yellow muddy ground. He felt something hit his chest. No, it was hitting the ground. He instantly realized that he had fallen off his horse. He didn't know how long he had been running. The Knight of Flowers had no strength left. He was struggling with only the last bit of consciousness. At this time, he could faintly hear a female voice. Was it an illusion? No, it was not an illusion. The one who was fighting with Cole at this time was a tall woman. Brienne the Fair, another rainbow guard of Renly. Cole was about to dismount and repay the favor of the Tyrell family. At this time, a man suddenly came, and the knight held the reins, and raised his sword sideways, slashing at Cole head on. He was so scared, that he shrank back, and hid under the horse, but the horse suffered. Unexpectedly, the knight also stopped his horse, jumped off, and quickly approached the Knight of Flowers. He held the sword with both hands, stood upright, and asked at the same time, "Sir Tyrell, are you okay?" The voice was a woman. She was even taller than Cole. "Why are you here?" The Knight of Flowers made a weak voice. "The king asked me to help you." Cole clenched his teeth and said, "You're killing me again. Can you get up?" Brienne asked the flowers. The knight, who collapsed on the ground, moved with difficulty, staggered a few times, and fell down again. "Ah." Brienne rushed up directly. "If that's the case, then defeat the person in front of you first." Cole danced with two swords around a sword flower, and made a confusing movement. Brienne of Tarth from Duskfall Hall, the heir of the Tarth family. This family has a nice name. Their patriarch is traditionally called Duskster, Earl of Duskster. This sounds much better than the two-sword knight. Brienne slashed with her sword, and Cole blocked it with his hands. He lowered his body slightly, and turned to avoid the sword. He slashed with a whirlwind, but she jumped sideways. Another heavy slash, steady and heavy. Cole sideswept his sword to block. The two began to compete in strength. His brachioradialis muscles were taut as ropes, and his two swords were cross-blocked, but the top was like a mountain pressing down. Brienne pressed down with both hands on the sword, but the bottom was stable and motionless. She gritted her teeth, her meridians bulged, and her arms were shaking. With a snap, the sword billow sprang away, and Brienne took a few steps back. She lost in strength. There was a whoosh, and in the blink of an eye, Cole's sword was approaching. She was shocked in her heart, and swung her sword to block it, but she felt weak at her elbow, and then she realized that she had been stabbed by the sword, right under her elbow. She groaned, and the sword had fallen out of her hand. Brienne ran back, and reached for the shield beside the Knight of Flowers. But Cole blocked the way first, swinging his two swords. At this moment, his foot loosened, and the half-dead 100 Flowers actually hugged his legs. Cole looked down in surprise, and suddenly felt his chest hit by a bison. It was Brienne who rushed up. But even so, Cole still did not fall, but stumbled back 2 steps, and stepped on 100 Flowers at the same time. Brienne grabbed Cole's arm, but she didn't know that Cole hit him head on. He saw that he held the hilt of the sword with his other hand and hit Brienne's head with a snap. Brienne's neck tilted back, and she bounced back, and hit Cole's helmet with her head. Both of them were dizzy in an instant. Cole cursed in his heart, "Ironhead kid, right?" He pushed Brienne's chin with his elbow, and she collapsed instantly. He pushed her away with one hand. Cole held his waist with the sword and panted. Suddenly, there was a whoosh in his ear, and Cole quickly opened the Eye of Time in shock. The arrow did not shoot at him, but shot to the side, as if it was intentional. A horse neighed, and when I turned around, I saw a knight in green armor, with 2 golden rose patterns carved on his chest. "Sir Julius, we meet again. P.S. Alas, such a good protagonist, how can you say he is Westeros Lubu? Doghead." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89 Prophecy. Ping, the blades met, sparks flashed. "It's incredible that you can survive in that place." Garland's voice was low, as if squeezed out from between his teeth. He swung his 2 swords left and right, ignoring the words. Garland dodged sideways, holding the swords with both hands, and pushed, leaning next to Cole, directly against his jaw. He blocked it with his horizontal sword, but the enemy turned sharply, and chopped at his thigh. Cole jumped away with his feet tied. There was only the sound of wind in his ears, and a long sword passed by the corner of his cheek. Good dodge. Garland's sword came again, aiming at the weak point of Cole's armor between his ribs. His swordsmanship was much more sophisticated than Cole's, looking for weaknesses everywhere to attack, as if there was a feeling of water dance. Cole fought with him for a few moves, but he was not at a disadvantage. With the Eye of Time, he could easily dodge ordinary attacks, but fighting 3 people in a row really overloaded him. Fortunately, Garland's water dance did not last long, and his moves changed, opening and closing again. He also went after the weak points, but the moves were not very varied. Defense was not Cole's character. He took a few moves and immediately seized the opportunity to start a fierce attack. His style of play was a bombardment. He avoided his opponent's killing moves again and again, and Garland also avoided his stabs and slashes again and again. As if he had found some pattern, Garland flexibly dodged left and right, retreating after one move. Garland held the sword with both hands and slashed to the left, but was knocked away by Cole's double swords. He stabbed straight with his sword, but was blocked by Garland. He took the opportunity to swing his sword again, but it missed, and his body fell half a step. Garland took advantage of the situation and jumped up, slashing straight down with his sword. Cole turned his wrist, held the sword back, and put the sword body against his elbow, and attacked. With a ding, the sword body broke. He quickly pulled his hand back. Now, Cole only had one sword in his hand. He threw away the remaining broken sword, and the iron chain gloves tightly grasped the handle of the other sword, rubbing it in circles. The two exchanged swords for more than a dozen moves, and it was impossible to tell who would win. Stab down, slash up, chop left and right. The two men's breathing became heavier, and they moved to look at each other for a while. A sword was sent up, but was deflected by Garland. Cole used the force to turn around and quickly turned around, increased the force of the sword, raised his arm and chopped, and Garland took a step back to avoid it. Cole attacked like rain, and he fought and retreated. The Green Knight forced a sword from the side, and Cole raised his hand to block it, but he didn't know that he was in a bad position. Garland's attack turned in an instant, and he fought and retreated again. The two fought for a few rounds, and the turning point came in an instant. Garland retreated a little too slowly, and was hit by a sword in the arm. He groaned in pain, and swung his sword hard to force Cole away. Cole chopped again with his sword, and with a snap, the sword in Garland's hand flew out directly. The defeat was obvious, and Garland stroked his arm and retreated, without turning his head, but his eyes were scanning left and right. But Cole picked up his sword, held it in his hand, and threw it in the air, and the sword fell back to his feet. Garland picked up the fine steel longsword, lightly raised the sword flower, leaned on one arm, and made a sword gesture. Cole exhaled lightly, and the iron chain gloves rubbed the hilt, and clenched his palm. The two fought again, but Garland, who was injured in the arm, was no match for Cole. He kept retreating, and Cole saw that he was struggling to hold on, but for a while he couldn't break his defense. With heavy hooves, the people that Garland had been waiting for a long time finally arrived. 4 or 5 cavalrymen rushed towards Cole. Cole saw this and retreated quickly, walking towards his own side, and several of his own cavalrymen behind him also came to meet him. The cavalrymen continued to fight on horseback, and Cole was shocked to see that Garland had been helped onto the horse. His purpose was not to duel with Cole, and at this time, he looked around, and saw that Brienne and Loras were nowhere to be seen. There were many horses without riders around him. He hurried to the nearest horse. Suddenly, he felt something strange behind him. He jumped to the left, and rolled on the ground. A lance rider rushed over from behind. He quickly stood up and ran forward, dodging another charge. After getting close to the horse, he climbed on the horse's back, and jumped on it. He held the reins tightly, to adapt to the warhorse. Although the battlefield was still chaotic, most of them were the cavalry that followed Cole. Some of the enemies died, some fled. The cavalry was running towards him. Seeing the engraving on his armor was a silver seahorse, Cole was not alert. However, he saw that the knight suddenly raised his sword when he had only a few steps left. He looked like he was coming with murderous intent. Damn bastard, Valyrian wanted to kill him. Cole dodged along his sword and passed by. The man turned back and attacked again, but Cole blocked it with his gauntlet. The longsword was pulled out, and the Valyrian knight's elbow was hit, and his entire hand was cut off. He screamed, but the longsword came again, piercing his chest. Blood slowly flowed from the blood groove of the longsword. He pulled the longsword back from the corpse, shook the sword, and shook off the blood. The battle was coming to an end, and Cole was careful to stay away from it. This cavalry was just ordered by Stannis to take over out of thin air. It was unknown who he could trust. Unless the Valyrian knight just now had a personal grudge against him, or the Earl of Drifthead wanted his life. If he died on the battlefield, no one would blame Montfort Valerian. It seems that the Earl's hatred for him is much deeper than Cole thought. Originally, Cole was not afraid of offending them because he knew that most of Stannis' men would die in the Battle of the Blackwater. Thinking about it this way, it seems that there is another fate waiting for him. The Battle of the Blackwater is the real dilemma. But if the situation continues to develop like this, can Stannis gather these remnants? The white dragon hovered in the air, but he couldn't see where Enlil was. When the cavalrymen gathered around Cole called several knights wearing stag carvings and the patterns of the Balaman family to his side. There was chaos everywhere in the royal forest, and for a while they could only mindlessly chase and kill the enemies in the royal forest. Cole simply dispersed the cavalry and took dozens of cavalrymen from the Baratheon and Balaman families with him. The riot was not as simple as running away. Many people had become crazy. In the royal forest, Cole and his men were attacked by several waves of people. Some people were actually taking advantage of the situation to cause chaos. They were wearing mismatched armor, some with helmets, and some with plate armor, which looked like they were stripped from corpses. The sky darkened, and the people who met Cole were all a mob, and they could not resist the momentum of a combination, and they fled, after being rushed by them. There were scouts exploring the way ahead, but they saw a man coming to report that there was a group ahead, and it looked like a group of bandits. Cole led his troops straight ahead. Generally, as long as the leader of the bandits was killed, the soldiers would quickly surrender. Cole had already gathered countless people along the way, but they were all settled on the spot, and a cavalry commander was sent to wait for the army behind to recruit them. There was a swaying fire ahead, and a man with a deer helmet was seen next to a shadow, and he was crawling up and doing something. Chapter 90 Renly is dead. The sound of fighting arose, the horses galloped, and the sparks danced. Occasionally, there was an explosion, and a hot stone was lifted up. There was a rabbit roasted on the fireworks, and the fat was popping out. Compared with the Song of Fire, the outside field was a dance of blood. The man with the deer helmet on his head seemed to cherish this thing very much. Looking closer, he was pressing a woman, but he stretched out his hands to tear the skirt and clothes. The green waist skirt that originally looked beautiful rolled on the ground and looked messy. The clothes were very complicated to untie. He fiddled with it for a long time, but couldn't tear it apart. He simply reached down and grabbed it, but heard a shout at this time. He raised his head, and with a swish, a headless corpse spurted out blood like a pillar. The deer helmet flew into the air, shining with the color of fine steel under the scorching light of the flames. The blood sprayed all over the girl's face. She looked up with some horror, only to see a knight with silver hair and silver armor standing on his horse. He seemed to be emitting a faint light, as if he came from the sky, with bright fire and shining silver armor. Cole was no longer surprised by the scene in front of him. There were many villages in the royal forest, and the fleeing bandits would sometimes look towards the villages to start killing and looting. Cole took a look and only saw the brown eyes under the blood. Compared with the woman in front of him, he was more curious about the helmet. The headless corpse had no decent armor except the helmet. After chopping a few people, the bandits knelt down and begged for mercy. A cavalryman picked up the helmet. Although it was covered with blood, it still felt extremely thick. It was filled with wool and the antlers were engraved with gems. Cole couldn't tell whose helmet it was for a moment, but he had a guess in his heart. He asked the surrendered bandits and captured villagers to follow the team. They rode in front and continued to shuttle through the royal forest. When the number of people reached hundreds, Cole asked a knight to lead the people to camp on the spot until someone met them. It was the fluttering flaming heart-crowned stag with a large number of colorful flags supporting it. The team was very large. Cole rode up. His white bird flag had been recognized, passed through the front team, and saw Stannis, who was dressed simply, but wearing a crown in the army. At this time, he was surrounded by a group of knights. The armor was gilded and embroidered with silver, with various feather patterns erected on the armor, and the family emblem was engraved with gold or silver threads on the breastplate, and the sculptures were outlined or decorated with gems. Cole didn't remember that there were so many knights with luxurious armor around Stannis, except for Valerian of Tidehead Island and Celtigar of Crab Island, who had money to decorate themselves. The other knights were as simple as their king. He saw Valerian in the crowd. The head of the Silver Seahorse family was also looking at him. Montfort Valerian's blue eyes were very calm, and it was hard to tell what he was thinking. Beside him was the disappointed Lord Celtigar. He smiled at Cole. He heard that his waist was injured. He didn't know if it was because he was too active at night. Your Majesty. Cole saluted on his horse, and everyone's eyes turned to him. Some people saw the two helmets hanging on his horse. One was his own white bird helmet, which was carved with a pair of stiff and ugly wings, and the other was the eye-catching and noble antler helmet. They began to speculate in their hearts who this silver-haired and silver-armored knight was, but only a few people recognized the family emblem on the armor. My vanguard is back, Stannis said. Sir Cole Julius, I wonder what good news you have brought back for us. You have never let His Majesty and us down. Lord Celtigar asked in an old and hoarse voice. We have gained nothing, except chasing the remnants. He shook his head, and Loras and Garland escaped from his hands. Sir, may I ask, if the armor hanging on your horse is from Renly? Lord Lister Morrigan asked. He was followed by a rather sturdy knight, wearing a green cloak and white steel armor. The appearance was very similar to the armor worn by Brienne. It was obvious that he whispered something in Lord Morrigan's ear. Cole picked up the deer helmet, and many people noticed that they had seen Renly's armor, and this was the helmet he was wearing. It's Renly's helmet. Yes, although he doesn't wear it often, but I have seen it. Stannis also looked at the helmet, and seemed to remember the scenes that Melisandre made him see. He frowned slightly for a moment, but in an instant he returned to his stone face. Where is Renly? He asked. Although he made unforgivable mistakes, he is still my brother from the same mother. I hope you didn't let anyone insult his body. Renly? He couldn't help but wonder in his heart. He had never seen any Renly. Even if it was dark and his eyesight was poor, he would not recognize the wrong person. After all, he saw Renly with his own eyes as the standard bearer. This armor was only obtained by killing a bandit. I didn't see Lord Renly. Bandit, can you bring it here for us to see? Someone said. He probably thought that Cole didn't recognize him. I recognize Renly. If I met him, why would I deny it? Although I chased him at first, I was intercepted by the Knight of Flowers on the way. The false king is dead. Why should we bother about it? His death is the will of the Lord of Light. Melisandre said in her graceful and exotic tone. Is Renly dead? No one can tell the real from the fake, just by looking at a helmet. But soon someone came with confirmation. It was Ser Parman Crane, one of the Rainbow Knights. He was wearing a purple cloak and grey-white plate armor, which was obviously a copy of the King's Guard. He had been following Renly, but now he brought the news that Renly was dead. He said that someone saw a white shadow attacking, and Renly fell off his horse and died. No one could see what it was, but his eyes kept looking at Cole. White shadow? Shouldn't it be a black shadow? Cole couldn't help but mutter in his heart. After Renly's death, a cavalry attacked, and the army formation was instantly in chaos. The cavalry carried a flag with a flaming white bird. Well, everyone's eyes turned to Cole. Isn't that the family emblem on his armor? These people are not doubting him, are they? Stannis pardoned Ser Parman Crane's fault. Cole saw the unhappiness in his eyes, and when the Rainbow Purple swore allegiance, he also accepted it. The king led his army back to Storm's End. He built a camp under Storm's End, and sent out knights to gather the remaining soldiers. Some lords and nobles who had lost their trace suddenly flocked to the castle, and pledged their allegiance. In less than 2 days, a camp of nearly 20,000 people was built outside the castle. Chapter 91, Persuasion. Fire was everywhere, and the hammer clanged on a sword. Rachi Sif used pliers to turn the sword, and placed it on the iron felt, and continued to hammer. When the sword was formed, he put down the hammer, and took off his heavy fur gloves. Master Blacksmith, I hope you can help me forge 2 swords. This was the name that Cole used to call Master Donal Noy on the Great Wall. My lord, you don't have to call me master, just call me Rachi Sif. Do you need a half-handed sword or an armed sword? If it's a great sword, I'm also good at it. In front of him stood a silver-haired young man, wearing a simple leather suit that didn't match his status, and a leather scabbard that was severely worn at his waist. The young man took out a half-handed sword made of fine steel, and handed it to Rachi Sif. This type is good. Rachi Sif took the sword, and rubbed the blade with his fingertips. It was a good sword, not a standard product. Such a sword could probably be sold for hundreds of silver deer in the market in Westeros, but it was still a certain distance compared to the top swords. The blacksmith stroked his beard and said, "It takes a lot of time to make such a sword. His Majesty the King has too much demand for weapons now, and I can't spare the energy. If you are willing to wait, I can prepare the materials for you now. But it will probably take a few weeks to get the sword. Of course, thank you for your trouble. I wonder if you have a finished sword." Lachi Sif brought a few swords, and Cole picked 2 half-handed swords and an armed sword. Although the 2 half-handed swords are of different styles, they are the same length. They are long swords, which are just right for his height. This kind of sword will work better with the shield, and it has both offensive and defensive capabilities. Although the lethality is not as strong as the 2-handed greatsword, it is enough to break armor. In fact, it would be better for Cole to use a sword that is longer and wider than the half-handed sword, such as his Winter Knight, which is placed between the half-handed sword and the greatsword. The arming sword is also known as the Knight's Sword. This is a simple one-handed sword. Its hilt can be fully grasped with one hand, and its length is shorter than that of a half-handed sword. Cole chose a shorter arming sword. He thought that this kind of sword is just right for daily self-defense. It is inconvenient to always carry 2 long swords. As soon as he walked out of the blacksmith store, he ran into someone Cole didn't want to see. Montford Valerian. Sir Julius. This time he actually greeted Cole. "Sir Valerian." The two nodded and crossed their heads. Cole walked straight, but Montford Valerian stopped and stood there and looked. Cole returned to the castle and took off his clothes. There were several bandages wrapped inside. Although they were all minor injuries, he still asked Mr. Pylus to help him deal with them. He picked up a book and lay down on the bed to rest. After a while, someone knocked on the door. Cole had the habit of locking the door, so he shouted and stood up to open the door. Outside the door was the king's servant Davin. Cole is like a lone knight now, without any servants, let alone attendants, and he fights alone on the battlefield. "Sir Julius, His Majesty the King will hold a wartime meeting in the hall to discuss the next strategy for attacking King's Landing." He brought the king's order. "Okay, I got it. It seems that the king can't wait to march to King's Landing." After Davin left, Cole quickly put on his clothes and walked out of the castle. There was a knock at the gate. Davos Seaworth was there. Although there was a gap in age between the two, it did not prevent them from being friends. At least compared to other nobles, the Onion Knight and him were able to talk. "The king will hold a wartime meeting tonight," Cole said after sitting down. "According to the king's wishes, we must attack King's Landing." The Onion Knight heard some worry in his words. "Lord Valerian suggested that we attack King's Landing directly. Is there anything wrong with that?" Cole nodded. Said Davos, "I'll tell you straight, I don't think we can capture King's Landing." Davos fell into deep thought. His Majesty will not accept such advice. He is very determined to attack King's Landing. But as far as I know, there should not be many defenders in King's Landing. Our enemies are not only from King's Landing. Are you talking about Tywin Lannister? Not only Lannister, Randyll Tully has regrouped his army at Butterbridge, and the scale is even no less than ours. Are you saying they will still be our enemy? But many adults have already announced their allegiance to your Majesty, and your Majesty has already pardoned them. Cole shook his head. Do you think the Tyrells, Tullys and Rowan families who are loyal to Renly will switch to us? With the king's character, do you think he will really forgive those who betrayed him? No, absolutely not. He knew Stannis. He was the most loyal believer in the law. The law was his god. Those who support the king now are not all fools. They just have no choice. They can betray Renly and join his Majesty. When there is a better choice, they will betray again without hesitation. A team that is threatened by loyalty and fighting may not be exempt from crimes and is not even as strong as a hired army. Do you want to persuade his Majesty at the wartime meeting? Davos asked. That was when he must stop this guy, he thought. No, I will not express any opinion in the Great Council. But I hope you can go with me to see His Majesty after the meeting, and I will also invite Mr. Pylus, he said. In the small meeting, it was the three of them who were isolated from the Queen's party. Saying this at a wartime meeting not only embarrassed the king, but also offended the nobles of the entire Stormlands. He was not stupid enough to do this. Davos sighed. I should believe you. Your ability is known to the world, but I'm just a mediocre person and a stupid person. With my background and wisdom, I'm afraid it will be difficult to convince the king. It is enough for you to be there, sir. We want Stannis to sit on the Iron Throne more than anyone else. Not only you, but everything I have, is given by him. Davos finally agreed to Cole's request. He was thinking that maybe Stannis would be willing to listen to his advice. They were all smarter and stronger than him. After Cole left Stannis' room, someone came to him, but it turned out to be a patrol knight. My lord, there is a team from your family outside the castle, the knight said to him. Cole was confused and puzzled, but he still followed the knight out of the castle. As expected, he saw the flaming white bird flag outside the gatehouse. The leader was not very tall. Cole looked closely and saw that it was Camillo who had been separated from him. It turned out to be them. No wonder they claimed to be from his family. The knight standing in front of the army rode his horse towards him as soon as he saw him. Chapter 92, Marquis of Summerhall. The Hall of Storm's End was packed with people. One after another, nobles led their knights to come in, and then were led by servants to sit in the hall. The hall was arranged with seats from top to bottom. There was a long table on the high platform, and the center of the long table was high and above everyone. There were various hanging flags on both sides, from various families in the Stormlands, and their seats were under the flags. Looking straight up from the main entrance, there was a crowned stag wrapped in a heart of fire. The family sitting at the long table with the king was the red and gold fox Florent family of Brightwater. People in this family often have a pair of protruding ears. It is said that their bloodline can be traced back to the supreme king of the first men, Garth Greenhand. Of course, this person is almost the ancestor of most nobles in the Reach. All nobles or knights in the Reach like to claim that their blood comes from here. Some people even study that even the blood of the Stark family comes from here. As for whether it is true or not, only people in the Age of Heroes know. Lord Alistair Florent was the first to surrender to Stannis, and his family was honored to sit at the king's long table. Of course, Selise Florent, who was also from their family, was Stannis' queen. Next on one side was a Meester and a red-robed witch. At this time, a silver-haired knight came into the hall. He was more handsome than everyone present, with a Dornish look on his face. As soon as he stepped in, he attracted the attention of all the ladies. He had a knight's sword on his waist, and followed by several serious armored soldiers. He walked straight through the hall, and went to the main seat. He sat on the side of the Meester, and behind him was the white bird flag. The family emblem of the fire-breathing white bird has been heard by every noble in the Stormlands and the Reach. Cole Julius, the most capable knight under Stannis. Some people said that he brought a white raven that could breathe fire from the Great Wall, and Renly was killed by this raven. Others said that he had magic and could summon an army of white ghosts, and Renly was killed by white ghosts. Anyway, this is a legendary knight. Cole naturally didn't know the stories he told others about himself. As for Renly's death, he could only say I had nothing to do with it. The king was the last to arrive, accompanied by Meesters, witches, and Lord Alistair Florent. When Stannis, wearing the red gold crown, sat in the main seat, Sir Axel Florent sat with his brother Lord Florent. He shouted, "Silence!" Instantly, everyone was silent and looked up. Axel Florent stood up and said loudly, "Knights and lords, let us all pay the highest respect to His Majesty Stannis Baratheon, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, ruler of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm. Long live His Majesty! Long live His Majesty! Long live His Majesty!" The shouts rang out all day long, like waves rising and falling, but it was unknown how many people were sincere. Stannis sat on the bench with an expressionless face. He raised his hand to signal for them to stop. "Silence!" Axel Florent shouted again. "I summoned you here for the sake of orthodoxy and etiquette. I know that you fought for Renly before and became my enemy, but I promise that, as long as you are willing to work hard to regain the Iron Throne for me, I can forgive your previous behavior. I will reward the meritorious person with a castle and a title. For the sacrificed person, I will send people to take care of his castle and train his heir until he comes of age." Stannis said to everyone, it is well known that you are the legitimate and noble majesty of the Iron Throne, the last blood of the Baratheon bloodline, and our legitimate monarch, so my Florent family is willing to serve you at your service. Lord Alistair Florent was the first to stand up, and at the same time, stretched out the long sword at his waist, pointing directly at the gods. One after another, the swords were drawn. Cole also stood up, but did not draw his sword, but only saluted slightly. When everyone sat down again, someone suggested, "Your Majesty, I think we should sail directly from the sea and reach King's Landing in less than 3 days. Although our fleet has become larger, it can't carry 20,000 soldiers at once." As the commander of the navy, Cole said, "Then I wonder, Lord Julius, what do you think?" Earl Alistair Florent asked him. "It's better not to mention my humble opinion, but if we go by water, our ships will have to go at least 3 times and make a big detour. Then why not go by water and by road, sail directly from here to the Blackwater River, and the army will set out from the Rose Road." Earl Bryce Caron said he was once Renly's Rainbow Guard, but was defeated and humiliated by Celtigar's knights, and later simply declared his allegiance to Stannis. Stannis nodded. This was exactly what he thought. Seeing the king nod, a group of nobles responded and began to express their opinions on the strategy of dividing the troops. Many people volunteered to be the vanguard or the king's iron guard. After a messy discussion, the final battle plan was that Stannis would personally lead the army under Storm's End through the Kingswood to King's Landing, and then Imry Florent would lead the fleet from Shipbreaker Bay, bypass Cape Marcel, enter the Blackwater River from Blackwater Bay, and attack King's Landing. Cole lowered his head and glanced at his admiral's badge, but said nothing. The next person to be appointed was Sir Good Morrigan, who would lead 5,000 vanguards first, and at the same time, send Sir Parman Crane and Sir Aaron Florent to Bitterbridge, to receive the soldiers from Highgarden. The last appointment finally came to Cole Julius, and he only heard the Maester Pilus read, "Cole of the Julius family, the Lord of Summerhall and Greendale, will serve as the acting Lord of Storm's End." This appointment was very abrupt, and even Cole was caught off guard. Lord of Summerhall and Greendale, does it mean that the territory from Summerhall to Greendale will be granted to him? This meeting is over. Please abide by your duties. If anyone violates the law, I will punish them severely. The Maester read the contents of the parchment scroll loudly. After that, the king stood up and left, leaving a group of nobles noisy. Cole also stood up and walked to the back of the hall. The Onion Knight also came over, smiled and said, "Congratulations, Marquis of Midsummer Hall." Cole smiled bitterly and shook his head. "It's just a ruin." Midsummer Hall is located at the intersection of 3 realms, connecting the Riverland, Dawn and Stormlands, and the King's Road also passes through here. "Next, what are you going to do?" Davos asked him. "To see the king." Outside the king's corridor, Melisandre, dressed in red, had been waiting. When she saw them, she whispered, "Sir Seaworth, Sir Julius." Seeing the Red Witch, Cole seemed to understand something. The king is not seeing anyone now. She stared at Cole with indifferent eyes. Cole just shook his head and smiled, then took off the badge on his chest and said, "Please help me return it to the king." Chapter 93 Water Dance. He stood on the high tower of Storm's End, watching the fleet leave Shipwreck Bay. From today on, he will have the final say in this castle, and it is unknown how long he can serve as the acting lord. Summerhall is also the Marquis of Greendale, and the meaning of Marquis is very clear. In fact, Marquis can also be called Border Earl, and Summerhall is also the border of Stormland, and it also includes Greendale. But how long can he be the Marquis? Sir Gilbert Faring, who stayed with him, was arranged to be his deputy. Sir Faring had 200 free soldiers under his command, and Cole himself had 300 personal soldiers, and the rest of the troops were all taken away by the king. Cole made Camillo and Jose knights, and they were the people who had followed him the longest. Some of these soldiers came from other families, and some were mercenaries, but they were all willing to swear allegiance to him at the moment. Storm's End was quite empty at this time, and Maester Pilus and his men had been taken back to Dragonstone. Ouch. But a voice was heard. Cole looked over there and saw a boy, oh no, a girl, lying on the ground. She jumped up quickly. It was Arya. Arya Stark. Well, Cole almost forgot about this family. It seems that they haven't left yet. "It's you?" Arya looked up at the family emblem on his cloak. You are the White Bad Knight. White Bad Knight. Cole laughed dumbly. When did he get this nickname? What are you doing? He asked. Dancing. The girl raised her legs, similar to the golden rooster stand. Are you practicing balance? The girl nodded in surprise. Syrio said so. The chief swordsman of Bravos. Do you know him? No, but I heard that there is a unique martial art called water dance across the narrow sea. The best of them is the chief swordsman of Bravos. Yes, Syrio is the chief swordsman. He is my swordsmanship teacher. Arya said. So, you are practicing water dance? Cole imitated him and stood on one leg. She looked at Cole's clumsy appearance and couldn't help laughing. You look like a clumsy big bear. Hey, Jon's little sister, have you ever seen a bear? Arya was speechless for a moment. She really hadn't seen one, but that was how Syrio mocked her. But she quickly realized that Cole called her Jon's little sister. Well, I finally met you again. You said Jon is your little brother. What proof do you have? Arya questioned him. What proof is there? Just ask him yourself. You big liar. Jon is not your little brother. Well, the little brother thing is just a joke, but we are friends. At least when we were on the wall, Cole said to her. He told me that he has a sister named Arya. I'm Arya. The two talked about Jon, and Cole shared with her the things that Jon had done at the wall, but she gritted her teeth when she heard it. Aliza is such a bad guy. She scolded the head coach of the Night's Watch. Yes, he's a bastard. Someone found him and said that there was something in the castle that needed his decision. Cole said goodbye and followed the man to the hall. Deputy Gilbert Ferreling had been sitting in the hall for a long time. Seeing him coming, he stood up and saluted. Cole walked to the main seat and sat down. He turned his head to Sir Ferreling and asked, "What happened?" "Sir, it's the manor outside the city." 4 farmers in simple clothes stood in the middle of the hall. A manor outside Storm's End was attacked by bandits, and many people died. Now the serfs of the manor asked for help from the castle. Cole understood the cause of the matter and thought that it was affected by the war. After all, in a war-torn place, bandits are bound to be rampant. Maybe this bandit group may be composed of a rebellious army. Cole asked the peasants, "Did you see how many of them there are?" "More than a dozen, all on horseback. They will kill anyone they see in the village." He nodded. "I will send people to patrol around your village. At the same time, I will allow you to train your own armed forces and patrols. As for your losses, I promise to exempt all grain taxes for the next quarter." After resolving this matter, Gilbert brought several more letters from various places. "My lord, these are letters sent by ravens." Cole opened one, which turned out to be from the Great Wall. Mormont asked for help from all the castles in the tone of the commander-in-chief. The letter said that a kind of dead person similar to the White Walker appeared on the wall. Among them, Jon Snow, the commander-in-chief's affairs officer, killed one, and another dead person was surrounded and killed by other Night's Watch brothers, but the Night's Watch also lost 4 people. He handed the letter to Gilbert. "How many prisoners are there in Storm's End now?" "There are some war prisoners, about 20 people." Gilbert read the letter, and he felt that the content of the letter was absurd. "Sir, we can't spare the manpower to send the war criminals to the wall. And this reason is really. Then let the Night's Watch come here to pick them up. I need a pen and paper." He wrote a letter to the Night's Watch in the name of the acting Lord of Storm's End, asking the Night's Watch to send people to Storm's End to take over the criminals of the 7 kingdoms. After dealing with the affairs in Storm's End, Cole quickly came to the training ground. He formulated some physical training and swordsmanship training for his personal soldiers, and of course trained their ability to cooperate in combat. They are already full-time soldiers. Although Cole reduced the number of cavalry and supplied horses to Stannis who went to the war, he still left 100 cavalry. Their duty in the future is to fight for Cole. After checking the effect of today's training, Cole called Camillo, who is now Cole's cavalry captain. Cole asked him to lead the soldiers to patrol outside the city, and at the same time issued an order. In order to protect the safety of the village, all the affiliated villages of Storm's End sent 20 people to Storm's End for combat training. The weapons were provided by themselves, and the food was supplied by the castle. He sternly declared to Camillo that this order was not a conscription, but a short-term combat training. Those who performed well in the training would directly join the city defense team. Camillo set off with his men. Cole called Jose and handed him the arrangement plan for the city defense patrol. Because he was illiterate, Cole could only explain it to him word by word. Which places needed to be patrolled, how many shifts a day, and how many people in each shift. He and the soldiers had dinner in the hall. The soldiers were divided into 2 waves and came in staggered. Of course, Lord Eddard Stark and Lady Catelyn Stark were also present. But our Duke Stark didn't look very good. Chapter 94 News from the North. Lord Stark. He looked at Eddard, who looked a little haggard. I thought you had returned to the north. Cole took a bite of lemon pie. Fine wheat flour mixed with eggs and lemon juice was baked into a bright yellow crisp pie. There was a pastry chef in the castle. In addition to daily bread, he also made some fruit pastries and cake pies. Eddard smiled bitterly on his face. He didn't want to leave. Lord Stannis seems to have forgotten his guests. Lady Catelyn said unhappily. She was angry that Stannis and his group ignored them these days. If he wanted the people of the north to fight for him, he should give their feudal lords enough respect. She thought angrily in her heart. Cole just ate the food on the plate in silence. He couldn't guess what Stannis was thinking. In fact, sending Eddard Stark back should be beneficial to him. He originally wanted to suggest that Stannis first form an alliance with the Northern Dawn, and then seek King's Landing. That night, Cole was reading letters in the main hall. These were all left by Stannis. They were very helpful for him to understand the situation. After all, the only way to get information in this era was through people or letters. He accidentally read a letter from the north. The letter was not even opened yet. It should have been delivered recently. The envelope happened to be stuck together with another letter. Cole finished reading the letter, then got up and went downstairs, but turned back halfway. It was late, so he decided to talk about it tomorrow. The guards gathered at dawn in the morning, and Cole led them to run on the city wall. This is the long-term situation in Storm's End recently. After the morning run, the guards began to train with a hum. Cole will train with a team until the end, and then Jose will arrange a day's defense shift. The servants have connected the hot water, and Cole can take a bath directly without testing the water temperature. After taking a bath, he went straight to the guest building and knocked on Eddard Stark's door, but saw Lady Stark slowly open the door. I request to see Lord Stark, ma'am. She opened the door and let Cole in, but Eddard was sitting at the head of the bed, facing the midday sun outside the window. Sir Julius? He asked softly, frowning and looking a little melancholy. It seems that suffering has made our always honorable and firm Lord Stark become powerless and cowardly. Here is a message from the north. I think I should show it to you. Cole took out the letter. Eddard took the letter and read it word by word. The more he read, the heavier his expression became. The Ironborn invaded the north on a large scale and captured several northern fortresses such as Winterfell and Deepwood Motte. This news exploded in Eddard's heart like thunder. He stood up quickly, but forgot the injury on his legs and feet. He stumbled and fell off the bed. Fortunately, Cole held him up. My Lord Duke, please pay attention to your legs and feet, he advised. Catelyn also rushed over to support her husband and asked nervously, Ned, what's in the letter? It's the Ironborn who are causing chaos in the north, ma'am. They have captured Winterfell, Cole explained. What? Catelyn screamed, and she asked in a trembling voice, what about Bran and Rickon? It's Theon. It must be Theon. Robb sent him to Pike Island. Catelyn gritted her teeth. She had advised him early in the morning that Balon Greyjoy had never been a trustworthy person. Even his children were the same. The son of a robber could only be a robber. There is no news about the young master for the time being. Cole shook his head. It was unknown who the letter came from, but the description in it was very superficial, and there was no information that could be dug deeper. Ned. Catelyn looked at her husband, only to see him sweating like rain and gritting his teeth to hold on. She swallowed back what she wanted to say in an instant, thinking, what can Ned do in this state? The Maester said that his legs need to rest for at least half a year, and a few days ago he was still stubborn and wanted to follow Stannis to King's Landing. Sir, please. Eddard tightly grasped Cole's arm. It was the first time Catelyn saw her husband begging so humbly. His Ned had always adhered to his honor and would rather die than bow his head. But he loved their children, just like her. They were all worried about Sansa in King's Landing and Bran and Rickon in Winterfell. But because of injuries, they could only stay in Storm's End, helpless. She frowned slightly when she saw this child who was the same age as Robb. Lord Stark, I will have someone pay attention to the passing ships. Cole walked out of the room and sighed silently. He also had to be prepared. Your Majesty, please don't go back to the original track. He went straight to Gilbert Ferrin. Sir Ferrin, I didn't expect the king to entrust you and me with the important task of guarding Storm's End. My lord, this is the trust of His Majesty in us. Yes, I heard that your son is His Majesty's squire. Yes, Byron has always been His Majesty's squire. Cole nodded. He will make an excellent knight, just like the emblem of your family. Take your words, my lord. Have you ever met Lord Stark? Cole asked him casually. We have had a few conversations. His Majesty Stannis is the most trustworthy person in the Seven Kingdoms. Cole pretended to be worried, but people always forget things, just like I sometimes forget what I said. Although his face was full of doubts, he still said, no one can remember every word they said. Yes, but as a vassal, how can we watch the king break his promise? Sir Gilbert had a question mark on his face. I need to go out for a while. During this period of time, the affairs of Storm's End will be temporarily handed over to you. During my absence, you will be the acting lord of the city, and I will let my knights help you. He looked at Cole with a shocked face, and he couldn't guess what his intention was. My lord, where are you going? He asked. Of course, to send Lord Stark back to the north. Cole said to him. You don't have to. Sir, we need allies. Cole looked straight at him. After your Majesty captures King's Landing, we still have enemies from the north and south, the Lannisters in the west, and the Greyjoys in the Iron Islands. If we rely solely on the nobles in the Stormlands, when will we be able to quell the rebellion? Gilbert Law thought that these things should not be what they should consider. But thinking that this Marquis is an important minister of the king, he must have many more things to think about than him. Thinking that this warrior who has been invincible on the battlefield is left behind. Maybe he is going to execute some secret orders from the king. If Cole knew what he was thinking, he would probably say, no, you think too much. Cole just knew that Stannis might lose, so he had to keep a hand. He didn't want the Marquis he just got to become an empty title in the blink of an eye. PS. It has been almost 2 months since I wrote it, and it will finally be on the shelves tomorrow. Chapter 95. Remarks on the release. It will be published today, I think. The publishing interface will be open at 12 o'clock. I don't have much manuscript in hand, so I stayed up late last night to finish 2 chapters. I will try to update 5 chapters today. Please bear with me. I would also like to thank all the readers who voted for the monthly ticket, recommended ticket and reward. That's it. I'm going to catch up on some sleep. Staying up late is harmful to your health. So I advise you to eat well and sleep well, exercise when you have time, and don't travel through time. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96. Pre-flight preparation. Wildfire is a liquid that can burn for a long time. It is highly contagious. As long as it is attached to any flammable material, it will burn wildly. Even on the water, this liquid can burn. This substance is produced by the Alchemist Guild. During the reign of Mad King Aerys, they even attended the royal meeting and were very prosperous. They also created a large amount of wildfire for the Mad King. The Mad King burned many people to death with wildfire, and Eddard Stark's father was one of the victims. In the end, the Mad King even thought of destroying the entire King's Landing with wildfire, but before his order was issued, he was chopped by King's good Jaime Lannister. Since then, people have called Jaime the King Killer. Killing the king he swore allegiance to has become a stain on his life. Cole has told Davos about the existence of wildfire. The white dragon hovered over the sea and could see all the passing ships. Soon Cole intercepted a sea ship, which was a merchant ship traveling between Dawn and Stormlands. Camillo was urgently called back, and the plan to train soldiers and civilians could only be handed over to him and Jose. The military camp was located just outside the city. "My lord, you should let me go with you," Jose said to him. "No, I need to leave some people at Storm's End. I don't know how long this trip north will take, but you must at least hold on until I return." Cole instructed them, "Remember, try not to conflict with Gilbert Ferrin. Our people will be assigned to the usual training and patrols. Your mission is only to guard Storm's End. You can refuse any external missions. If you encounter any problems that cannot be solved, have someone write a letter and hang it with a rope under the southeast corner of the wall. If there is news of defeat from the front, you should quickly summon all the militia into the castle and declare them regular soldiers of the Julius family. I will pay for all their food, clothing, housing and transportation in the future. Those who have made contributions in the battle can be knighted and obtain the fiefdom of Midsummer Hall." Cole continued. "Yes, my lord." The two answered in unison. Cole couldn't help but smile. "Remember the first time we met? They asked me to take over an army without knowing what was going on. At that time, I wasn't even a regular knight. When I walked into the barracks, I found out that I was asked to take over an army composed of serfs and fishermen. Sir, I remember you asked us who was willing to work for you." Jose recalled. "At that time, I was thinking about whether I should stand up, but Camillo got there first. This kid always runs faster than others. I saw that Lord Cole was extraordinary very early on." "Hey, don't think I don't remember. That's not what you said at the time. You said that this noble boy looked very young and should be the son of a great noble. If you follow him, you won't have to go to the battlefield." Jose directly insulted Camillo. The two of them were originally bad friends, and Cole was not the kind of person with an unstable temper. He was always kind to his own people. "Are you disappointed? Following me always leads to danger." Camillo chuckled. "The war is not over yet, but I'm willing to trust you, just like you chose to trust me at the beginning. During my absence, Storm's End will be handed over to you," Cole said to them solemnly. The expressions of the two people suddenly became serious. Jose said, "Sir, after you rescued me from the mercenaries, my life is yours. Don't worry, this time, even if I die in battle, I will hold my sword tightly in my hand." Camillo also said, "Sir Cole, I will never let you down." After giving instructions to Camillo and Jose, he went to visit Eddard Stark. He had someone inform them about the ship, but the journey was quite long and there might be a storm, so they had to be fully prepared. In the corridor, Cole met Arya, who was still practicing dancing. Jon's little sister. Cole shouted. She turned around with an unhappy look on her face. "My name is Arya, Arya Stark." "Well, Arya. Excuse me, are you practicing dancing again?" Cole came over. "Where's your father?" he asked. "Why did you look for him?" "To talk about sending you home," Cole answered her. Arya looked puzzled, wondering if her father was going to send her back to Winterfell, just like he wanted Sansa to board the ship with her. She sometimes thought how nice it would be if they boarded the ship together, her father, Sansa and Syrio. In order to cover her, Syrio stayed to deal with those Lannister soldiers and Meryn Trant, the king's guard. Syrio is so powerful that he should be fine, she comforted herself in her heart. "Back to Winterfell?" she asked. "Of course." Arya happily took Cole to find Eddard. "My lord Duke." The two chatted for a while. Eddard looked at the young man in front of him. He was more handsome than most people Eddard had seen. He had seen Renly and the child called the Knight of Flowers from the Tyrell family in King's Landing, but they were all slightly inferior to the man in front of him. Eddard was never a person who judged people by appearance, but during these days at Storm's End, this child named Cole Julius did surprise and move him. He looked very much like a person in history, with the same silver hair, the same handsomeness and strength. Catelyn had told Eddard that what the child did at the Eyrie, he felt that his wife's uncle Blackfish did the right thing, and he would have done the same if he had been there. Eddard even felt that he looked like Rhaegar, the man who brought him and Robert endless painful memories. But how could it be possible? He saw the bodies of Rhaegar's youngest son and daughter with his own eyes. The baby in the cradle was unrecognizable. They called him Aegon, a name that had been used in the Targaryen family for many generations. Every time he saw the silver hair, he would think of Rhaegar, and then of Lyanna. At this time, Eddard's eyes fell on Arya standing on the side. "I have hired a ship, and I will take people to escort you to White Harbor. But the journey is dangerous, and we must make full preparations. Cole said. Gods have mercy. Thank you very much for everything, sir. His family has believed in the old gods for generations, and he has asked the gods for help countless times in the black prison of the Red Castle. Eddard sat in a chair to bask in the sun. The Maester said that the attic was too cold and not suitable for healing injuries. So at this time every day, Catelyn would always help him to a windowsill. Sir, is there any news from the north? He couldn't help asking. This place is too far away from the north, and even the ravens don't know how long it will take to fly. No new news. There was no news from either Robb Stark or Winterfell. Chapter 97. King's Landing prepares for war. This is news from the north. Tyrion took the parchment. The news was that Winterfell was captured by the Ironborn. The news on this piece of paper was much more detailed than the one in Cole's hand. It said that Bran Stark, the second son of Eddard Stark, and Rickon Stark, the youngest son, had been burned to death by Theon Greyjoy. The little devil knew that his sister, the Queen, would be very happy to hear this news, but it was not good news for them. With those people in the Stark family, it is very likely that they will extend their hatred to them, just like the unprovoked disaster he suffered in the Eyrie. Lions are always framed, simply because they eat meat. But wolves are not much better, Tyrion thought. He had to tell Cersei to keep an eye on the girl named Sansa. This was their only bargaining chip. If she ran away like Eddard Stark, then his brother Jaime would really not be able to come back. I heard that Eddard Stark appeared at Stannis' place, so it should be the case. They all thought that Stannis was the heir to the throne, but everyone knew that the throne should belong to the Targaryen family. It was not Stannis' turn to sit on it, but the son of the Mad King across the Narrow Sea. Compared with these, what really made Tyrion feel uncomfortable was Cole. He had clearly asked his father to make him a knight, and even proposed to make Irenel his fiefdom. But now he is working under Stannis, and he has done a lot of great things. You see, you have done so much for Stannis, and he just gave you a ruin. When he first saw the news, Tyrion even thought he was reading a knight's biography. Cole in the letter made him feel unfamiliar. The boy who followed him silently had such a powerful ability. Tyrion couldn't help thinking how great it would be if he was in King's Landing at this moment. He thought Cole was dead and even felt sad for a while, but who knew that he miraculously came back to life? Is the friendship between the two deep? Not really. They had only been together for about 2 months. Even the bond between she and him was much stronger than this friendship. He was just a bastard who clung to the rich and powerful. Tyrion cursed him in his heart, just like Bronn. Whoever paid for it should do the work. Tyrion really wanted to tell him, what Stannis can give you, Lannister will pay double. Now Stannis is leading a large army to King's Landing. This large army was completely given to him by Cole. But there is also good news. Cole seems to have been placed in the rear by Stannis, and he was asked to stay at Storm's End. Tyrion couldn't understand why he did that. Did he think that the boy's record was too outstanding, and he was afraid that others would say that Stannis won the Iron Throne with Cole's help? No, it was really stupid to think so. Or did Stannis want to give Storm's End to Cole? Would Tywin give Casterly Rock to someone else? Obviously impossible. Just like he would not consider himself as the heir, even if his father would rather he die in battle or join the Night's Watch. He would not let him inherit Casterly Rock. But this is the best. At least we don't have to meet on the battlefield. Tyrion made full preparations in King's Landing. He told Cersei that the castle would not fall, but he was not confident. Although the castle was reinforced by generations of Targaryens. Although the castle is high enough and thick enough. But they don't have so many people to guard it. Most of the people in the capital garrison are newly recruited, and he shouldn't have too much expectation on them. The alchemists brought him a liquid that can burn on water, which they called wildfire. But to Tyrion, the green flames were like ghosts one after another. But it's okay, let Stannis' fleet taste the taste of this ghost. What he can expect is that his father Tywin will arrive with his troops as soon as possible, because they can't hold on for long with so few people. He asked Shagger and others to enter the royal forest. He hoped that these warriors from the mountain clans could slightly block the pace of Stannis' army. Although these barbarian warriors were brave in regular battles, especially in the battle of defending the city, discipline was far more important than bravery. He would not doubt that these people would escape or surrender to the enemy, but he could never expect them to obey orders and defend the city walls. Tyrion assembled dozens of ships on the Blackwater River. In addition to the fleet that originally belonged to the city defense, he recruited all the merchant ships docked in King's Landing. There was no ship on the entire Blackwater River at this time. There was even a group of traitors in the city who had already called Stannis the king in advance. They were called Horned People, but these fools didn't know that their news had leaked out. There was a eunuch in the palace who had a lot of hands and eyes. His ability even made Tyrion feel afraid, but at least for now, he helped Tyrion a lot. If he hadn't informed, Tyrion would not have known the existence of this group of Horned People. If it broke out on the battlefield, it would be a huge hidden danger. He has done everything he can. But Sister Cersei doesn't seem to think so. She blames herself for stealing Tommen and wanting to harm Joffrey. She even threatens him with Cersei doesn't need to use her pretty head to think about it. Before Joffrey gave birth to a child, Tommen was his heir, and Tyrion just wanted to protect him. As for harming Joffrey, although this kid is a bastard, how could he do anything to his relatives? Who knows? Anyway, he is a little devil. If he is irritated, he will catch anyone and send him to the seven hells. The courtyard of the Red Castle goes directly into the hall. The castle has a total of 7 towers. In the hall, there is a velvet carpet from the door to the Iron Throne. The king came in from the bronze door and walked straight to the ugly chair. The throne was built by Aegon the Conqueror with the swords of those who surrendered. Sometimes Tyrion wondered if there was Valyrian steel in these swords. Ever since seeing the sword called Ice brought by Eddard Stark from the north, Tyrion can be sure that the Winter Knight in Cole's hand is also Valyrian steel. Similar color, equally sharp. The conditions brought by the Wolf Kid are to release his father and sister, return their family sword, and declare that the North will no longer be attached to the Iron Throne. Tyrion thinks they should have a good talk. It would be best if they can use this ice and Sansa to exchange for Jaime. His room is in the Tower of the Prime Minister. The room has Mirish carpets, gold-framed round windows, a meeting room and an attic, but Tyrion hopes there will be a woman here. Lord Tywin once ordered him not to bring prostitutes to the castle. But now, where is Tywin? Tyrion really hopes he is right in front of him. Chapter 98 Arrival at White Harbor. The sea surface was like a hill, one wave after another. With a thud, Arya hit the board. Little sister Stark, don't fall into the sea. Arya, who got up, looked at him angrily. At this time, the ship had reached the sea outside the Vale of Arryn. They stopped at Cape Marcel for a day because of the storm. Cole took the sword and taught Arya sword skills in a serious manner. Both of them were holding wooden swords. She chopped hard again and again, and Cole easily resisted. She seemed to have found an outlet to vent her frustration. But no matter how she attacked, Cole remained stable. She simply dropped the sword and walked to the railing with a pout. Everyone treated her like a child and told her nothing. Her mother locked herself in the boathouse. Arya heard her praying to the gods from day to night and from night to day. Cole picked up the sword and asked, "What's wrong? Don't you want to practice now? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Her tone was tearful. "I'm also worried about Bran and Rickon. They just don't want you to be sad. Just leave some things to the adults." Cole leaned against the railing. "I want to help too." Tears flowed down her eyes. Looking at her crying, Cole thought that Arya now was not the one who had experienced Eddard's beheading, her mother and Robb being killed at the Red Wedding, nor was she the one who had been trained by the Faceless Men. She was just a 10-year-old girl with a naughty and curious personality. "Did the chief swordsman of Bravos only teach you to cry, little sister?" Cole said with a slightly mocking tone. She raised her tearful eyes and shouted in a tone that was almost roaring, "No, I don't allow you to talk about him." Arya picked up the wooden sword and chopped him. Cole dodged comfortably to the side. "In the Night's Watch, everything is obtained by the sword in your hand. You actually chose to take the sword, so you shouldn't complain, little sister Stark." Bang, bang, bang. All her swords fell into the air. Just like the formula Syrio taught her, swift as a deer, quiet as a shadow, swift as a snake, still as water, strong as a bear, fierce as a wolf, Fear is more hurtful than a sword. So powerful, Arya exclaimed. With a bang, Arya's head was gently knocked. When using a sword, look at the enemy. Who is your most hated enemy? Little sister. Think of my face as his. Cole pointed to his face. Arya wanted to think of this face as Joffrey, but for some reason it reminded her of Jon. I won't fight. She put away the sword. Colton was stunned. Why didn't this brat follow the routine? You are not Joffrey, nor Cersei. Just listen to her. With a bang, the whole board shook violently, and Arya staggered out of the boat. Ah. Her hands were tightly grasping the railing of the boat, and it seemed that she would fall into the sea at any time. A huge wave was rushing towards the deck of the ship. Cole held the railing and swayed for a while. He finally stood firm, but saw Arya hanging outside the boat. Hold on to the railing. Cole shouted at her. Arya felt her hand slipping. She couldn't hold on and was about to fall. Cole grabbed her hand and pulled her up, but the boat shook again, and he fell on the deck, his whole body lying between the railings, with one hand hanging on Arya. What was going on? He raised his head and saw a storm coming in front of him. The dark clouds covered the sea, the waves were surging, the sea breeze was beating the ship's flag, and the sailors came from all directions to collect the sails. Someone saw the embarrassed two people and was ready to run over to help. But Cole pulled Arya up with one hand, and only when he was close to the railing did he carry her down the deck. He returned the frightened Arya to Wolf Dad and Wolf Mom. Cole rushed to the deck quickly. The captain was in the air, and he was standing on the deck commanding the sailors. Captain, what's going on? Cole approached Captain McCuney Beaker in the wind and rain. We encountered a storm, sir. God bless you. I'm so glad to see you're okay. My sailor told me that you were standing on the deck, and it's very dangerous now. What are you going to do? Cole asked him. Storms have always been the biggest enemy of sailors, but please rest assured, sir. I have encountered storms of this scale at least 5 times. Cole looked at him, but there was nothing he could do. It was better to leave it to professionals. He nodded. I hope the gods can protect us. Then I'll leave it to you, Captain. The cabin was shaking and vibrating constantly. Several times he felt that he was almost tilted at a 45-degree angle. He could hear the sailors paddling all the time. After shaking for an unknown period of time, the ship finally stabilized. He climbed out of the cabin and felt a bright sky. The light of the setting sun shone on his face, making him a little dizzy. He couldn't help rubbing his eyes with his hands. The sea was calm at the moment. Although there was a cold wind, it didn't feel very cold. Cole saw the tired me. You are a good captain, Mr. McCuney Beaker, and your crew is also competent. Are you interested in working for me? Cole asked him. I can give you a bigger ship and let you be the captain. Hesitation flashed in his eyes. He knew something about this lord. You can think about it slowly. By the way, I will give each of the crew 5 silver deer as a thank you. Where are we? He asked. The me replied, we are almost at the Bite Bay. They are almost at the north. After entering the Bite Bay and passing the Three Sisters Islands, they can reach White Harbor. White Harbor is the main trading port in the north, and one of Cole's goals this time. The family emblem of the Manderley family is a white mermaid holding a trident. Their family originated from the Reach, but was expelled from the Reach more than 1,000 years ago, and then drifted to the north, and was finally taken in by the Stark family. White Harbor was originally the territory where the Stark family built the Wolf's Lair to defend against pirates, but it was given to the Manderley family by King Jon Stark before the conquest. It was not until the morning of the 3rd day that they arrived at White Harbor and got off the ship at the dock of White Harbor. Although the me people did not express their allegiance, they said that their ships were waiting for Kerr's call. Earl Wyman Manderley greeted them, and he came with a dozen guards. Kerr also brought 10 guards. Lord Stark. The Earl got off the sedan chair and saluted him. We meet again, Lady Stark. How are you doing recently? He saluted Catelyn again. Chapter 99 Return to Mingayu Mountains. The North welcomes you, sir. After listening to Eddard Stark's introduction to Cole, Lord Manderley greeted him. Wyman Manderley was called Lord Eel. He was so fat that he could only move around in a sedan chair. He was the fattest man Cole had ever seen. Lord Wyman looked quite kind. I'm not unfamiliar with the North, Lord Manderley, but he was unfamiliar with White Harbor. Cole looked at the port of White Harbor, which was divided into the inner harbor and the outer harbor, and should be able to accommodate hundreds of warships. The fat on Lord Wyman's face was squeezed together, and his eyes narrowed into slits. I hope it has left you with good memories. The north is too big. I have been to less than half of it, and I have not been able to ride a horse for many years. Now some people call me Lord Too Fat to Ride. As the host, I shouldn't let the guests stand on the dock to blow the wind. Please move to my castle. I have asked someone to prepare a banquet. Wyman saw the Duke's foot injury and gave up his sedan chair. It's great that you can come back, Lord Eddard. The North needs a master who can shock the situation at this moment. The North has been in turmoil recently. Lord Wyman, do you know what the situation is like in Winterfell? Lady Catelyn asked the question she cared about most. He sighed. Please accept my condolences. Master Bran and Master Rickon have. It goes without saying how much of a blow this news was to his parents. The Damthian Greyjoy burned them alive. Lady Catelyn fainted when she heard the news. Lord Eddard Stark looked very solemn, and Cole could see his shaking fists. Sir Wyman, do you remember your oath? Eddard's vocal cords trembled. Yes, Lord Eddard. I'm loyal to your father and to you. The Manderley family will never forget the oath they made under the gods. I order you to gather all the warriors immediately. I'm going to Winterfell. Wyman could understand his pain, but he still advised, Sir Roderick Castle and Lord Clay Severn have led people to surround Winterfell. Lord Eddard, you can rest for a while before going. Persuasion was useless. In the end, Wyman gathered 100 people for them. Because of his physical condition, he could not accompany them, so he could only send his knights to escort them. Sir, you won't go with them? Cole watched the Stark family go north with him. Cole shook his head. I'm only responsible for escorting them to White Harbor. Although Lord Wyman was well informed, many news from the south had not yet been received, and he had only heard a little about this Sir Julius. Lord Manderley, may I have the honor of asking you for a glass of wine? Cole turned and looked at him. Of course, you are the guest of the Duke. How dare I neglect you? Please follow me back to the castle. The banquet is ready. Cole rode with him. He was carried in a sedan chair with 4 servants holding his 4 corners. It seems that a lot of things have happened in the north recently. I wonder if Lord Manderley has any news about the Night's Watch. He asked Manderley. Manderley's thick neck moved slightly. I don't know much about the situation on the wall. After the death of Aegon V, the wall has almost become a place where no one cares. By the way, Lord Manderley, how many ships are there in your port? He didn't understand why Cole asked this, and casually said, if you count merchant ships, there should be hundreds of ships. Generally, I only know when the treasurer reports taxes to me. I remember that the ancestral home of the Manderley family is in the River Bay, right? Yes, the Manderley family once ruled the Manderley River Basin for a generation. Cole had some memories. It was the big river that the Bitter Bridge spanned. The Blue Brook River next to Greendale City also merged into the Mander River downstream, and then flowed together to the western sea of Westeros. How many gold dragons do you think I would need if I wanted to hire all the ships in the port? He asked again. Lord Manderley frowned slightly. What do you want to do by hiring all the ships in the port? This is a considerable expense, my lord. It will cost thousands of gold dragons. He looked at the ships. Then I wonder if Lord Manderley, are you willing to do me a favor? Wyman Manderley hosted a banquet for Cole in his new castle, the Mermaid Palace. His family was quite wealthy because they occupied the port. After resting in the Mermaid Palace for a night, Cole took his men on a Mirish ship to cross the Bay of the Bight the next day and stop the boat on the shore of the valley. Captain, please wait here for a few days. Cole instructed the people. My lord Marquis, I heard that the valley is not peaceful. You have to be careful. Cole led his men towards the Bright Moon Mountains. After entering the Bright Moon Mountains, he led his men to hunt and barbecue, and they were having a great time. They camped under a rock that day, and a mountain deer was roasting on the fire. My lord, the arrow shot during the day was amazing. It hit the mountain deer's head with one arrow. They drank and talked, not knowing that the fire and smoke had attracted the attention of the natives. Cole listened to them laughing, and ate venison in silence. He suddenly stood up. Quiet, guys. Our friends are here. Looking into the woods, Cole shouted, come out, there's no need to hide. Soon, a dozen mountain clansmen in coarse linen clothes and tattered armor came out in a group. Protect the Marquis. The guards drew their weapons one after another, ready to fight. But Cole came up to them and waved his hand for them to put down their weapons. We've said we are friends. It would be rude to draw your swords. Put your swords away quickly. The guards were a little surprised, but since it was the Marquis' order, they could only obey. Cole turned around and faced the people of the mountain clan. Which tribe are you from? We are the Blackhair tribe. Plain people, hand over your weapons and armor. Cole drew out a sword and threw it to him. Don't be nervous, warrior of the Blackhair tribe. We can give you the sword. We have no ill intentions. I recognize your daughter's Illa of Zyke. The mountain man picked up the sword in a daze. This sword was many times sharper than the broken iron knife in his hand. I'm Cole from the Painted Dog tribe. I don't think we need to fight. The Blackhair tribe. May I know your father's surname? I'm Daru, son of Baal. Okay, Daru, son of Baal. I want to inquire from you about the location of the Painted Dog tribe or the Burning Man tribe, and the sword is your reward. The words of the plain people cannot be trusted. You are not from the Painted Dog tribe. People from the Painted Dog tribe and the Burning Man tribe all have burn marks on their bodies. Cole pointed to the armor of the guards beside him. You can see that we are wearing heavy armor and have sharp swords. You have no advantage in a fight. If you are willing to lead the way, how about I give you another set of armor? Daru fell into deep thought. Chapter 100 Question. The shadows of the mountains are heavy and the roads are dangerous. The foothills are full of rock fragments, and the occasional forests are mostly desolate. The resources here are scarce, and the mountain clans can only hunt goats and shadow mountain cats in addition to plundering. However, it is unknown whether the shadow mountain cat is a prey or a hunter. Because of the scarce resources in the Mingayu Mountains, the mountain clans will fight for the slightest food and territory. It was Daru and his men who led Cole. Although they were called wild people in the Seven Kingdoms, their customs and beliefs were just a little barbaric, and their IQ was no worse than anyone else. Don't really think of them as idiots. Daru knew that Cole and others were a tough meal, just like the Shadow Mountain cats. If he couldn't chew it, he would be buried. So he chose to agree with Cole's suggestion. They walked for a while, and suddenly someone behind them actually went into the woods, and that figure was very agile. Cole picked up the bow, pulled the string and shot the arrow, only to hear a scream from the bushes. He drew his sword, turned around and stabbed it into Daru's chest. People should not be too greedy. Seeing Cole draw his sword, the guards also attacked. No one is injured. Cole wiped the blade of the sword with a piece of linen cut from the clothes of the mountain people. No, they left one alive. It was a thin child from the mountain clan, about 12 or 13 years old, who was brought to Cole with a face full of fear. Lead me the way, and I will spare your life. Cole threatened. He was the one who had been leading the way just now. The mountain child nodded frantically. Don't think about running away. Cole pointed to his bow. The cold wind poured in from the mountains, and the snow on the top of the mountain was moving down layer by layer. The breath of long winter was approaching, and I think the free people in the Mingayu Mountains should have been able to feel it. I remember that your Blackhair tribe is not in this area. Cole asked the child. It's the Painted Dog tribe and the Burning Man tribe. They came from the plains. He was about to say the plains people, but he was afraid of angering the leader. They got a lot of armor and weapons from the mountain, and then drove all our tribes here. They walked on the mountain road for 2 days, and they didn't know how many mountains they had crossed. Finally, a continuous green forest appeared in front of them. Not long after entering the forest, someone came up to them, and dozens of free people surrounded them. A familiar person finally appeared in front of Cole. Long time no see, Timed. It was the boy who burned his own eyes. Timed looked at him for a long time, before speaking in some doubt. You are the flame. No, the king has returned to the kingdom of God. Who are you? Cole. I'm Cole. The one who took away your holy objects. Cole said to him. Timed frowned. I came with my promise, Timed. Please take me to see the fire priest. He walked up with a scimitar, tilted his head, and looked around Cole, and finally shook his head. If you are really my king, then prove yourself with fire. He took a torch from his side, and handed it to Cole. Cole put his hand directly into the flame, but heard someone from the guards calling out, Lord Marquis. He held the head of the torch in his palm, then turned the torch upside down and handed it to the other hand, pinching it hard, and the flame was extinguished in his hand. Cole asked, "Is it possible now?" He wiped his blackened hands on his clothes and then spread his unscathed hands. The guards were all in disbelief, but Timid was convinced and then knelt on one knee. "Lord of Fire." Seeing the red hand kneeling on the ground, the surrounding flame people also knelt down. Cole kept his promise and put the boy from the Blackhair tribe back, and then, under the guidance of Timid, they walked towards the settlement of the Painted Dog tribe. After his return, the fire priest convened a meeting of the entire tribe, and all the leaders of the flame people gathered in the trial cave of the Painted Dog tribe. Cole sat under the dragon bone, with Timid standing behind him. When some people saw him, they looked surprised, while others looked cold or expressionless. "Fire priest, you summoned us in the name of the Fire King. What's the matter?" a leader asked loudly to the half-bowed old woman. Before the fire priest could answer him, Timed said, "The Fire King is sitting here." The leader stood up with a laugh and pointed at Timed. "Do you want to say that this Flatlander is the Fire King? Or do you want to be the Fire King? My king, please let me cut off his head for you." Timed raised his scimitar. "The Flatlanders are all cunning mountain cats. They are not worthy of leading the noble free people," someone said. Cole had expected that they would not recognize him as the Fire King, but fortunately, Timed still believed in him. He was the first warrior of the Fire people. With him, Cole's work would be much easier. "Timid, are all the people here?" Cole asked him. "My king, there are 2 people who are not here yet." Cole nodded slightly. "I believe that my face is not too unfamiliar to you." He stood up. "Even if you forget me, it's okay. You still have the memory of the armor on your body." "Flatlanders," a leader shouted at him. "These armors were won by the brave flame people through fighting. I know that your bravery is seen by the world, but are you satisfied with just armor and weapons?" Cole asked them. "Do you remember the prophecy of the Flame King?" Of course, they grew up listening to their parents telling stories about the Flame King since they were young. The Flame King is their god, just like the King of Weirwoods believed by the Wood people. "I'm not sure I'm your Flame King, nor do I want to be your Flame King," Cole said to them, "but since you have fought for me, I will keep the promise I made under the flames." "Do you feel the coming of winter? What do you want to say?" Someone has lost his patience. "I don't know how many of you here have experienced winter, and how many winters you have experienced. In the Flatland Kingdom, everyone knows that the long winter is coming." Some of the elders seemed to recall something that frightened them. "I can give you a forest that is rich enough to spend the winter. That forest is even larger than the Mingayu Mountains." He couldn't compare how big the Imperial Forest was, but exaggerating would definitely do him no harm. "We already have the best place in the Mingayu Mountains. Why should we go with you?" someone asked loudly. "The supplies there are 10 or 100 times more than here. You can even hunt red deer, wild boars and rabbits. And there is no one to compete with you. How can we trust you?" Cole smiled. "Then why don't you go and see it yourself?" PS. 5 chapters have been updated. Thank you for your subscription. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.